Good morning. We are going to start a tiny bit early, as seems to be the habit for my streaming. Um, it looks like the stream is drifting behind real time a little bit at a time. I started it and stopped it again because it looked like it was actually about 5 minutes behind. Right now, it looks like it's just a few seconds behind. So that's fine. We'll get started. No one's actually joined, but that's not a problem. So welcome to the 25,000 subscriber Q&A. Looks like we are doing this about once a year. My expectation was channel growth would look different than this, but it looks like what is happening is I get about 5,000 subscribers in a 12-month period. And so I suspect we're going to do another one of these in about a year again. Some of the analytics on the channel would indicate that we are possibly near saturation. Others say the opposite. My expectation was that channel growth was this kind of S-curve thing, and maybe it is, but if it is, I'm at the bottom of that S-curve. It's also possible that for a channel like this, it's actually just kind of linear, which is what the 5 years of data actually sort of indicates, is that we get about 5,000 new subscribers every 12 months. And it's been doing that for about 4 years in a row now, so maybe we'll keep it up. Let me actually get my mouse over where it's useful. So, just so you know, these are questions from the community, but also questions from Twitter and from Blue Sky. Members get first priority, so they will be the ones I answer first. But we will alternate between questions from that were asked beforehand and questions asked in the chat. I will answer pretty much any question, but if you ask some sort of a-hole question, don't expect a non-a-hole answer. As far as I know, there was only one question that was asked that I didn't put in here, and that one was most definitely not asked in good faith. So, yeah, if you're interested in asking a question, you can put that in the chat. If you put it in the chat with a super thanks or a super chat, much more likely that I'm going to actually see it and answer it. But with that, we will get started. So, first question, thoughts on how technology has changed games, be in the case of graphics or new design decisions. Do I have a criticism of NVIDIA and AMD, or nothing of praise of what they're able to do? So I don't really have criticism of NVIDIA AMD, but I do think that as an industry, two things. In the 90s and early 2000s, we definitely had a lot of art direction by graphic card. I've called it before, which is basically the game looked like whatever you could do on the graphic card, which isn't how you should be setting the art direction of your game. If you look at movies, movies are made with cameras. Cameras can render photorealistic images, but art direction is applied on top of that in order to make movies look like something that isn't just a window into the real world. Unless window into the real world is the goal they're going for. In the 90s and 2000s, we kind of just were making everything based upon what the cards were capable of. We've backed away from that a little bit, but what we have done, which I've talked about a lot on the channel, is ended up in a situation where we have this, what I've called the fidelity death cult, where we are chasing higher and higher and higher graphic fidelity with ever diminishing returns at ever increasing costs. It's hard for me to put that on NVIDIA or AMD's plate. It's hard to blame them for that. I think the industry has always basically made the games that are barely capable of running at whatever technology currently existed. And so So a game like Baldur's Gate 1 made with like 60 people. A game like uh, a game like GTA 6, $2 billion budget. Are they doing a bunch more? They are doing a bunch more, but also they're doing a bunch more from a graphical perspective. And so there is a place between GTA 6 and Baldur's Gate 1, which looks really, really, really good and doesn't cost $2 billion. And you're starting to see some of the top end of AA, some of the best indie games start to explore that space. Games like Baldur's Gate 3, games like Expedition 33, these are games that are made with much lower fidelity than something like GTA 6, but they look really good and they're made for a much lower budget. So technology obviously has impacted. Like every generation has introduced something that has actually changed gaming fairly significantly. Sometimes for the better, but not always. I mean, this is nostalgia talking, but there's something pure about games that are made when you only had two buttons, and now we have what, 8 buttons basically and a D-pad. So games will always exploit the technology they have access to. I just think that we are starting to see such diminishing returns on the graphics side that we're going to have to take a step back. So no questions in chat yet. Are there any game ideas I'd like to see fleshed out one day? I really like design ideas that explore treating non-combat things like combat. What I mean by that is, in combat is this toolbox of things. Like you have weapons that do damage and apply effects, and you have enemies that have hit points and resistances, and you throw them into a bucket and you bump them against each other, and you're able to reconfigure those pieces in lots of different ways. And sometimes these are custom crafted experiences. You put a sniper up in the sniper tower, and then he's working with a bunch of guys with smoke grenades, and it's all sort of designed in this very specific way. But sometimes you just sort of throw a bunch of random creatures into a blender and let them bump up against each other. With a lot of other gameplay systems aren't like that. So conversations are a good example of that. Conversations are completely bespoke. You talk to a person, all of the responses, all of the interactions are predetermined. There's no ability to really sort of bump things up against each other. Now, I also don't think that the right answer is just generative AI, where they're just generative AI barfing a bunch of auto-generated text back at you. But I do wonder for things like exploration, for things like conversation, if there are systems like if there are systems that could be similar to combat, that could give you these interesting mechanics that can rub up against each other in interesting ways. I guess 2-part question: soft tacos or crunchy tacos? Usually soft tacos, but I actually like a good crunchy taco now and then as well. So I guess non-answer, but usually soft tacos. Whoops. Yep. No, we're good. What do new or mostly just lack, and what should they learn? How should they learn it? So the number one place I see most new leaders, especially ones that come from development, so they transition from individual contributors to leaders, is that they are doing a different job. So you are moving from leading through people. I'm sorry, you're moving from doing stuff yourself, like your fingers are the tool, to now you have a group of people and you are acting through them. And realizing that the fact that you could have done something faster doesn't mean you shouldn't still delegate it is the number one place I see subject matter experts fall down. Is because, like, I could do this in 20 minutes. You're going to take 2 hours. I'll just do it myself. It's like, no. Most of the time, you're better off letting that person take 2 hours, letting them take that off your plate, because you aren't trying to optimize your own productivity. You're trying to optimize the productivity of your team now. Okay, so question from the super chat. Barrow tells stories through characters, but what are those stories? So what I mean by telling stories through characters is that characters provide the anchor through which to tell whatever story you're trying to tell. So if it's much easier to get emotionally attached to a cause if one of your followers was affected by that cause, or is working with that cause because of something that happened to them. Individual one-to-one interactions are just much more impactful. So Tally, much bigger impact than an entire race is dying. Even though from a numerical perspective, it's 1 versus billions, the fact that it is a person that you know and have interacted with, that's what makes it matter. The truth of the matter is, at the end of the day, it almost doesn't matter what story you're telling, as long as you're telling a story through people with emotions. I'll just do both of the ones in the chat right now. I guess I'm going to have to ask that person. So why this might be players seeing more hand-holding and yellow paint to address this. I'm sorry, it's probably in reference to something that I just said, but I don't remember what it was that I said. So you'll have to ask that question again. How do you know which decision is right? What features need to be dealt further? Which ones are good as they are? Yeah, I wish I had a good rule of thumb for this. This is a really good question. The reality is that it's something you have to figure out on your own to a large degree, and the answer is going to be different for different people. Different people are going to make different decisions in the same situation. The trick is, okay, so it's a bunch of things. So I did a video very early in the channel talking about the famous business school thing about taking an olive out of the first class salads on an airline, and it saved them $50,000 a year or whatever it saved them, and everyone's high-fiving each other. And my point about that is that, yeah, but you made the salad worse in the process, and you need to, if you just keep taking olives out, if you just keep making the thing a little bit worse because you believe it is imperceptible in the micro, if that one olive is imperceptible to the experience of the person on the plane, that may be true, but if you keep doing that, that's what enshittification is. That's what we're talking about now, is everything just keeps getting a little bit worse, but over the longer time horizons, everyone's noticing that everything is constantly getting a little bit worse. So when you are deciding what feature is good enough, you need to be thinking about, well, if everything in the game, so a great game is 3 good features and no bad ones. So if it's bad, then you probably need to deal with it. If all you have is okay features and no good features, then you don't have a good game. If you already have your 3 good features, then you need to ask, well, are they features that everyone is going to experience and perceive as good? If not, then you maybe don't have your 3 good features. So it's a bunch of questions you kind of have to spin around, and you develop a feel for it over time and decide how you actually decide what needs to be done. A lot of people's initial instinct is to think that everything needs to be perfect, which is not true. A lot of people's initial instinct is to overemphasize wherever they came from. So if they're an artist, the art needs to be perfect and they don't care about anything else. Also, not the right way to approach it. It's a bit of everything. You need to figure out what is actually good enough. The one thing that I'm realizing really recently, looking at these games coming out with lower fidelity, is one of the things that was really driven into me in AAA was texel was consistency of texel density. So basically, that's just a obfuscated term, being that any time I look at anything, everything should be the same level of quality in the frame. The problem with that as a philosophy, so the good thing about that as a philosophy is nothing is distracting. When you look at anything, everything looks good. The problem with that philosophy is it means that everything kind of has to be done to the same fidelity level. So it does two things. It actually pulls the stuff that doesn't matter up and forces you to make it to a higher quality level than you need to. And it arguably also pulls the top down. You don't want to you're unwilling to overinvest in the most important things because you are worried that it's going to force you to pull everything else up further. So what you see in something like Expedition 33, their hair is really nice looking. But sometimes they get things in the background not so nice looking. Fine, not bad, but just fine. So what you end up, instead of having everything being an A minus in the entire frame, is you have some things being A plus, and then in the background maybe it's a B minus, and it's fine. And that's a lesson that's a new lesson for me. Yeah, okay, good. A question about Rory Sutherland. Okay, Rory Sutherland argues that outcomes improve if marketing was more thoroughly integrated throughout the process, from inception right through delivery. So I actually do sort of agree with him. The problem that I've had with marketing within the video game industry is that often marketing doesn't actually. Often my experience is that many of the people in marketing don't actually understand the industry as well as they think they do. So what he's basically saying with that is he's saying, if you make a product you can't sell, what's the point? So I do sort of agree with him. One thing that EA does, which I don't like, is they have marketing as a separate group outside of the development teams. And they have this almost adversarial relationship, and it's partially intentional. And I've talked to other studios that have embedded marketing teams, or at least embedded marketing individuals who are senior members of the team, sit at the table, and are at least involved in the conversation. And I think there's a lot of logic and a lot of good in that thought. In the same way that I like having a senior QA person at the table who can raise his hand and say, what you're describing is 1,000% untestable. Having a marketing person at the table who can at least say, I don't have any idea how we would tell people this feature exists in this game. If you want to do it, that's fine, but I'm not going to be able to use it to sell the game. So are you sure this is actually important enough to basically be an almost hidden feature until people purchase and play the game? So yeah, I've had some bad experiences, but I do actually basically agree with him. Are there warning signs that a project is drifting creatively, even if milestones are still being hit? I would argue that if a game can't tell you what it is and what it isn't, if the project as a whole can't tell you what it is, what it isn't, if it's not something super duper out into left field, it should be able to tell you. It should be able to give you comparator games. It should be able to give you anti-comparator games. If it can't do that, that's a bad sign. Even if it can do that, if individual people on the team can't come close, at least, that's probably a sign that you are getting a division within the team, or people that don't understand or don't agree with the vision. So if you are coming into a team and you're looking to try to figure out if they are actually on track creatively, that's one thing I might suggest is go in, find someone medium seniority, or even like not the least senior people on the team, unless you want to really be aggressive, but probably not the least senior people on the team, and ask them, what are the goals of this project, and actually talk to them. And if they have good answers, then it's probably good. But the reality is that sometimes projects need to change direction. Sometimes your creative vision was wrong, and you are discovering that it's wrong. And sometimes that happens organically. Ideally, you want to realize that you're doing it and explicitly state that you're changing. But sometimes you have to wander a little bit to get there. But yes, you can figure out that maybe the project's a bit lost within the team itself, usually. Oh yeah, so I realized that I didn't realize there was a character limit on the questions. I didn't even notice that you were just continuing the same question. Yeah, I mean, I do think that there is a certain amount of this is the looking at problems differently rather than rushing to a solution. Often dev teams are very solution oriented. So his marketing agency is very creative, and the groups he works with are often consumer product groups who are very not creative. So in my experience with marketing in the video game industry, it's been the other way around. The teams want to do completely insane stuff, and the marketing teams are I just want you to make Grand Theft Auto but with swords, because I can sell Grand Theft Auto but with swords. He still has a point, I think, but I think you want to have a creative person that is looking for out-of-the-box solutions. I'm just not convinced in video game development that is going to be your marketing people. Probably because the marketing people that have that spark are actually probably making a ton more money marketing toothpaste, to be honest. What does sustainable development actually look like in practice, not just in theory? So I think we're starting to see hints of this in the industry, in AAA adjacent places. One problem I've talked about a lot is completion urgency. Teams often get into a situation where they are in development. They aren't finishing stuff. They are just they're just starting a lot of threads. They're just letting a lot of things get going and not bringing things to finished. So if you can get a team that wants to finish things, when they start something, they finish things, then what you end up with is a project that is in a nearly shippable state all the way along. It's a really bad game, a really short game at first, and it gets a little bit bigger and a little bit better as you go. And teams resist this because it is inefficient in certain ways, or at least it appears inefficient, because rather than, to use an example, rather than lighting the entire game all at once when you're done, you're lighting each individual scene as you go. And that's probably not the most efficient way to go. But what it means is that whatever that gotcha that was in the lighting system, you found that way earlier because you tried to bring something to final. I don't think we have solved remote work at large scale yet. We are seeing some things that are working. I would argue that a lot of teams that are perceived as being sustainable are maybe not, and what they've actually done is they've outsourced their crunch. So they had, I don't know what happened on Expedition 33, but I imagine there was a lot of crunch happening at their outsourcing partners, and that's sort of beyond the horizon. So I would argue that's not really sustainable. That's what you've done is you've just outsourced the problem. But I do think that more completion urgency, bringing things to done, pile of sand or hourglass, pushing that, these all help. I've been surprised at the things that seem to only occur once you start crunching. The crunching is triggering these things to happen that you would think you'd be able to do. Final testing, final bits of bugs coming in, other just that don't come in until the team really feels that things are actually now coming into final. I don't think crunch is necessary, but I do think that signal is necessary, and so I think the quest is to find a different way to signal that no, it's go time. We're really shipping now. We're still only working 40-hour weeks, but now we're actually shipping. That's the thing that will get us there, I think. The other thing, my favorite drum to bang, is stepping away from the Fidelity Death Cult, making games that are good looking, great looking even, but aren't pushing the hardware to its bleeding edge, because that makes the art a lot easier to make. It makes optimization a lot easier to do, and that just takes the pressure down a little bit. I think that everything is going to consume every available bit of resources. I mean, animals do this in their environments. So the trick would be, here's where I think, to go really high level, I think the way you actually get sustainable is by somehow figuring out how to back away from that. So not consuming every single bit of resource that you have, removing all contingency, using up all your risk mitigation in order to make as much as you can, and keeping a little bit of your powder dry, and then using that to deal with things. That's really hard, because you're basically saying we're going to intentionally make we're going to believe we're making a slightly worse game because it's going to make it more sustainable to make. Now, does it actually make a worse game? I think that's open for debate. I actually think it probably doesn't. I think it probably ends up with you making actually a slightly better game, but it's going to feel like you're making a worse game because you're stepping away from things on purpose because you want to make sure that you have the room to come in a smoother way. But that's a lot of there's a lot of industry habit behind not working that way. I know. Okay. How do you personally manage the pressure of being the final decision maker on a long project? Yeah, that's a good question. The reality is that I've found that in most cases, either a decision is super obvious, either the question is going to, the answer to the question is going to be super obvious, the decision is going to be super obvious, or it's going to be that all of the answers are kind of fine. So in many cases, any decision is better than no decision. Drifting with no decision, which is what a lot of projects do when they get themselves into trouble, is usually far worse than even taking the third best answer to a decision. So for me, a lot of it is gather some data quickly, make a decision, and then put an immense amount of weight behind that decision. Doesn't mean you won't ever reverse that decision. It just means, in fact, give me new data, let's reverse the decision. But let's make where we are heavy so that it's hard to move. So what that does is it just provides gravity that then other things can be sucked into that decision right away. I've never had a problem with this, and sometimes people who have not had to learn this are the worst teachers, and maybe that's where we are with decision making. Because for me, I've never had difficulty with this, and I know lots and lots of people do, but make a decision, any decision, honestly, and just don't wiffle waffle too much, and that will help a lot. I don't think you need animations for a character to open a door. So I actually really like what The Witcher did, which is basically they made most of their doors are saloon doors. They just swing away. In fact, I think they might be magical double hinge saloon doors. So they always swing away from the player. So the Witcher can kind of just reach out and push, and it just opens away from them. So it's a very simple animation. I think you get a little bit of benefit from that, as opposed to, because it grounds you in the world. The character interacting with, I'll just do that. The character interacting with physical objects in the world is expensive, but it's also very grounding. So if you can do it in a relatively cheap way, I would say it's probably worth doing. What The Witcher does is you just kind of do this, and the door always moves that way. If you're coming from the opposite direction, you do that, and the door swings the opposite direction. No, who cares? I think that's probably worth doing in most cases. But yeah, it's definitely a place where you can save a fair bit, because interacting with objects is a pain in the butt. So if you can avoid it, it's going to save you a lot. But I would be inclined to say that grounding the character in the world is probably worth it in many cases. Looking back, what is one production habit or mindset you wish you had developed earlier in your career that would have saved you the most time, energy, or regret? So the one thing that I probably would, if I could travel back in time and talk to me early in my career, it would be about not letting problem people swirl around on the project for as long as I did. Because I'm a very work the problem kind of guy, my natural inclination is to try to make everyone be productive. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes you can make that work. But I've definitely taken that too far. And what that's resulted in is probably not having the conversations with people early enough to say, like this isn't working, man. You've got to stop interacting with the team in this way, or you've got to pull up your socks, or you've got to do whatever I need from them earlier. Because often the person will respond to that quite positively. And if you act sooner, then they have a lot more time to fix the problem. If you are constantly just trying to find a place where they fit, eventually you run out of places, and then it's too late. You're not willing to try to help them fix themselves. If you confront them earlier, then you can still move them around. You can still do all the work the problem things, but at least they are a more active participant in that. And sometimes the guy that's an a-hole is only an a-hole because he didn't realize, no one told him. Not always. Sometimes a-holes are a-holes, but sometimes. Sometimes you tell them, what the hell, and then they fix it. If you could go back in time and what would I remove from each Dragon Age game, and what would I add? This is an interesting question. So there's some things that in Dragon Age Origins that I think have not aged super well. But if I was going to go back in time, I would be, honestly, Dragon Age Origins is so big. Okay, I think probably I would be tempted to either cut or dramatically reduce the dream sequence part from the Mage Tower. It's not very good content. It's kind of filler. It was definitely done pretty fast in the end. But that being said, I'm also curious as to what if we had done the Avar origin for Dragon Age Origins. Like, I'd like to have another human origin, but wow, what an expensive ad. Dragon Age 2, I would cut the fact. So what I would do to the end of Dragon Age 2 is that if you side with if you side with Meredith, then you fight both. You fight Orsino and Meredith, because all the same stuff happens. I guess spoiler. I get all the same stuff happens. But if you side with the mages, that you don't fight Orsino, because I just think it essentially makes Meredith right. My feeling is that Dragon Age 2 basically ends up with, no matter what you choose, Meredith is right, because the mages lose control, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, they are barely tethered nuclear bombs. Maybe we do need them to be treated as non-humans. So I would probably do that change. If I was going to add something to Dragon Age 2, probably just a couple of more levels to use. That would be the easiest add. I guess another thing that I don't know where this cut would come. The Act 2 of Dragon Age 2 was supposed to be a gather enough money to go on the expedition, so that there was a lot more just a lot more flex in it. But if you just do the crit path gives you enough gold to go on the expedition, so it kind of doesn't work. I don't know where I'd make this cut, but I'd be tempted to cut one of those crit path missions just to get that back. Inquisition, the big thing that I would do to Inquisition would be I'd probably cut Hissing Waste maybe, or one of the big levels, because it's too big. And the other thing I would change would be to dramatically reduce the amount of power that you need to go on the crit path missions. That's there for not super great reasons, and I think you could cut it by 40 to 60%, and the game would just be paced better. Also, make sure you ship with the thing we added after the fact, telling you to get out of to leave the first level and actually go into the game. And I think you probably could spend a little bit of time and make that better as well. I guess we'll talk Veilguard. Veilguard, the thing that I would add is the keep. I told them to. It wouldn't take that much. I mean, it would, but what would I take out of Veilguard? I don't know. That's a good question. I don't have a good answer to that one. Am I hiring anytime soon? No, I'm not. But I am wondering about possibly expanding my consulting business. I say this year has been... It's weird that I'm thinking this, because this year has been a complete catastrophe in terms of the consulting business. People are not spending money on consultants. But I've been thinking about it, so maybe stay tuned, I guess. But no plans. We all know you've made RPGs as a professional game dev. I think it's supposed to be but. What kind of games do you play in your own time? What do you wish those two categories would take from each other? I browse a lot of games. When I was looking through my Steam played, I have a ton of games that I've only played for about 2 or 3 hours, just enough to kind of get a sense of them. The one that I play the most is I play Factorio with my son, and I love Factorio. I don't actually wish that RPGs would take anything from Factorio, to be honest. It's a game that I don't know that I want base building and RPGs to overlap too much, because I think both are sort of all-consuming, And if you had a base building game with a too strong of a story, I think that either your pacing would be terrible, or you would lose the thread of the story because it would have to be so thin. So I don't know that those two things are super hyper compatible with each other. I do like, I guess I was going to say visual novels, not visual novels, like things like Her Story and games like that play around with narrative, and I like the idea of these incomplete information where the game knows everything, the information is all there, and you're kind of hunting around to understand, where the understanding is coming from you putting the pieces together. RPGs tend to really want you to understand, so they are giving you a lot of information, and usually multiple times, to try to get you to understand, which I think is usually what you want. But as a result of that, one thing that BioWare has definitely struggled with is any kind of mystery. The bit of the bit of Dragon Age 4 that's kind of missing, that's sort of been memory hold, is the part that's set up at the end of Trespasser. We're going to find Solus, we're going to figure out what he's doing, and then we're going to stop him. So Veilguard kind of starts with what is essentially the climax of another game that doesn't exist. Because, to be honest, we kind of don't know how to do mysteries, information gathering, that kind of game. It's been done. I just don't know how well something like Oberdin would plug into a standard RPG setup. But I think there's interesting space to be explored there. Any advice for a game design student in 2026? So find someone that will employ you at any level. I would say, historically there's been a dichotomy between go into AAA, you don't get as much creative control, but you get job security, or go into indie or AA, you get more creative control but less job security. I don't really feel like AAA is offering that job security anymore. So it probably pays better. So now I would say that if you can find a job, take it, assuming it's paying enough to live on. And I would take it based on salary and if you enjoy what the project they're working on, as opposed to saying, I'm going to go in AAA because I'm going to have a job in 2 years, because I'm not convinced that that's actually true any longer. Fallout 1 was kind of detective-ish. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. You are not really understanding. They actually did a good job of setting up that you, the player, and you, the character, are both don't know what's going on, and you're figuring out what's going on. And actually, something like BioShock, not an RPG, but very close to an RPG, also does a pretty good job of you are figuring out what is going on as you explore that game. BioShock is interesting, and Fallout in some ways is similar, where you are sort of figuring out the story after the fact. But as I say that, I realize that kind of the figure out where Solus is kind of that as well. It is a detective story. You are putting together the pieces after the fact. So that's interesting. The gaming industry seems to be in this crazy transitional period with private equity firms' mass layoffs. There are going to be a ton of indie studios popping up from people who are just trying to survive in an already flooded market. If you were to take a stab at it, what do you think will happen in the next few years for both the devs and the consumers, and how can we best support projects we love and want to see more of. So if there's a studio that's doing something that you're interested in, wishlist it, talk about it. Wishlisting, my understanding is, matters quite a bit. The Steam algorithm is much less sophisticated than something like the YouTube algorithm or the Twitter algorithm. So getting lots of wishlists on a game is going to make a difference. If you buy the game, leave a review, especially if you like it. So, I mean, the answer is actually really simple, but throw attention and money at the things that you want to see. Don't throw attention and money at the things you don't want to see. I think there are a fair number of studios that are popping up that are overly ambitious. If you were on a AAA team and you weren't one of the top 3 people on that project, the chances of you being able to jump directly into AA are probably close to 0. It's going to be hard for you to get consistent funding. It's going to be hard for you to get people to pay attention to you. So you could try, and you might get someone to throw $3 million at you, and you might think you're on the way, and then this funding is going to dry up and you're going to go away. That's what we've seen with a bunch of ambitious indie in recent times. The problem is if you go smaller than that, so you're not AA, now you're going into not even AAA indie. You're going into, I'm just making a game with a $700,000 budget. Most of the money, the investment money, is not interested in things that small. They want things that are big enough to be worth their while. So then you end up in a situation where you're struggling to get people to, you're struggling with people to give you money at all. Now, maybe you can transition into Kickstarter and crowdfunding, but then you're back into getting enough attention on your games. There are game studios that have been around for years that survive by releasing 3 to 4 games a year that each makes $30,000 to $100,000. That is a viable path. I'm not convinced that if you're moving from AAA that you're going to be able to make that transition very easily unless you have a very specific mindset. But I do think we're going to see a lot more games. We're going to see a lot more games that don't make it. And probably once... So AAA is going to flail around for a couple more years. And while that's happening, there's a space that's being left where the top of indie and the top of AA are moving into that space. I think that will continue. I think we will continue to see 3 to 5 AA games do really well every year. If AAA eventually stops flailing around and settles down again, though that might stop, but it's going to be a while. And honestly, AAA really is going to have a lot of trouble kicking its live service habit. And it may be thinking about it's trying, but it may not actually be trying. We'll see. It's bad. Was I involved in the remake of Baldur's Gate 2, considering I was the lead programmer? I feel like I talked to Trent about it, but no, I wasn't directly involved. I was still working at BioWare at the time, and Beamdog is the one that did that. I looked at my code recently-ish, and it's pretty simple. The one thing to remember is that code bases have gotten exponentially more complicated. My memory, and I don't know if this is quite right, is that Baldur's Gate 2 is only about 600,000 lines of code, and I'm pretty sure that Dragon Age Inquisition is more like 20 million lines of code. So what's that? That's like 30 times as complicated. But 600,000 lines of code, as insane as that sounds, is something that you can kind of wrap your arms around. So what that means as well is if you have someone that's familiar with the way that Bioware thinks, which definitely Beamdog had, from a code perspective, it's well within the plausible space to figure out, and they did a really good job. If I was going to put together a small indie team, how would I go about it? Funding, team, company setup, so on. It depends on. So if I was going to start a studio, which I kind of have, I would start incredibly small. So I would be myself, and if I literally cannot do something or buy the thing I cannot do. So if I was going to do it right now, it's like I have to ship a game. I would start with I'm going to do all the design, all the programming, and I'm going to buy assets off the asset store. And okay, so that's probably not going to get me all the way to ship because it's going to probably look too generic, too asset story. So I'm going to want to get some art in there. The next person I would get probably, well, okay, I would actually be tempted to hire someone like a biz dev person who can try to look for money. But, okay, let's pretend for a second. The second person I would hire would be a tech artist. So not just a pure artist, a tech artist. Because the reason why I would do that... sorry, one second. The reason why I would go tech art is because a tech artist is going to be able to probably let you use a lot more asset store assets than you would think. You see a lot of asset store assets in Expedition 33, but they are doing much of stuff with the materials and layering things on top of them to differentiate them. And a tech artist is going to be able to get you there. Plus, they're going to help you with performance. I would not go flat leadership structure. Now, when you're 2 people, that leadership structure, even when you're 10 people, that leadership structure is going to be 9 people, 1 leader, but you're still a leader. Like, this is not a democracy. I've seen so much chaos caused by teams that try to pretend like everyone has the same voice. It's just a mess. You need there to be a structure. Once you get beyond 30 people, you probably need more than 1 leader as well. So go in knowing that. I would probably, even though I'm super not convinced that we know how to make remote work yet, I would build remote from the ground up and try to make it work. I would probably hire, though I would still probably hire as many people locally as I could, so that if that blew up in my face, I would have a fallback. But I would try to go remote and try to scale up as a remote team. Okay, funding. If you're starting small, if I was starting small, I would self-fund it. If I'm going bigger, if I have bigger ambitions and I'm scaling up the team, I don't know. I would maybe try to do a Kickstarter to see. It's hard to do a Kickstarter if you have nothing, though. The problem of any funding model, almost any funding model, if you're starting from scratch, they're going to want such a big chunk of your studio. You're going to give up so much. They're going to be climbing around in your pants all the time, and you're not going to want that. So that's one of the reasons why my instinct is to start tiny and then grow up from there. Even though it's going to take you forever, is that it lets you stay in control a lot longer. If you go out, like I could probably, I mean it's 2026, so maybe not, but I could probably find someone that would be willing to give me $30 million to make a game. But the strings attached to that are strings that I'm not prepared to accept. So, yeah, that's where I'm at. Do you have any thoughts on why Bioware production director position has been open for 6+ months? Could be lack of interest or hiring freeze. My assumption is that it's a hiring freeze. That either they forgot to take it down. I'm not entirely sure I'm going to be honest. Given the number of people that are at Bioware right now, I'm not sure what that job even is. Like what they're hiring for, like exactly what they're looking for. Um, so yeah, I there aren't there aren't 100 people at Bioware anymore. So I'm not sure what a production director even is for anymore. They have very senior production people there, so partially I think it's. I'm sure there was hiring freeze. Um, I doubt it's a lack of interest because it would be a well-paying job. I suspect it's a hiring freeze, and possibly they don't actually want to fill that job at all. Maybe Ben Wall's retiring. I don't know, and they're looking to backfill him, and he'll actually retire when they find that person, and they're just looking for a really, really, really good person. That's another possibility. Is it viable for smaller teams to build BG1, BG2 scale and fidelity experiences these days and stay afloat, or is there no path to scale back the complexity and cost of games when we take into account current publishing habits? In other words, is there even a market for smaller, less refined games? There is. The problem is that what we actually kind of have. So Baldur's Gate 1 only sold like 1 million copies. I know only, but I mean compared to Inquisition at 12 or 15 million copies. It's a massively different thing, and the game was cheaper too. So yes, something like Pillars of Eternity, I think it's under 1 million, but it's around 1 million. So that's a game. The Pillars of Eternity is basically a Baldur's Gate game. Would have cost more than Baldur's Gate because salaries are higher, and I think I haven't set them side by side, but I think the visual fidelity is higher as well. But the tools are a bit better, so it was probably less. It was probably around twice as expensive. Would be my guess. So yes, it can be done. It can be done, and there is a market, but like we talked about before, it's a very crowded space, especially at the bottom. So the trick is, so when Baldur's Gate is coming out, it's the only thing like it, and the press is very interested in talking about it. These days, there isn't a lot of press. So, right, that's right. Pillars of Eternity was made in Unity, which certainly helps. It's very difficult to get the press to pay attention to your medium to small size game. When you see the press talking about the tiny games, Balatro and that, it's usually because they've already broken out. So the trick is, if you were going to build Baldur's Gate 1 right now with a team of, let's say, 50 people, you absolutely could do it. You could probably do it for not an insane amount of money. In fact, probably if you really went in with cost control in mind, you could probably do it for cheaper than Baldur's Gate 1 was made. The trick is, now you need to get somebody that has pull to pay attention to you. So an influencer or influencers or somebody that's going to get attention on you. There's like 15,000 games shipping on Steam every year. Granted, most of those are garbage, but even if you say it's 1,000, how are you getting someone to pay attention to your one game out of the 1,000 other games that came out? That's the trick. Okay, let's see. Owen Mahoney recently talked about larger studios splitting into smaller studios as a template for more sustainable game dev, Embark, and so the problem, so I think that if you're going to do that, you need to really do that. I think some of the troubles that BioWare has had is that it was kind of, but at its peak, kind of for studios, but also kind of not. So if you're going to split, I think you almost need to just really do it. It's like, you don't necessarily need to move into different buildings, but effectively, you need to make it very difficult for people to move between studios. So the model that exists within EA, for the most part, is that it's relatively difficult if you're at BioWare and FIFA wants to take you. There are mechanisms for that to happen, but it's relatively high friction. So if you get something that was as high friction as that, then I think it could work. Otherwise, I think what ends up happening is what happened with BioWare, is that the next thing out just grows and eats everything. And then you just end up in this situation again. didn't Pill's Eternity take a long time to earn back his budget? Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. And if you make a Baldur's Gate 1 style RPG, don't expect that you're going to be profitable within a year. It's probably going to take a couple of years, for sure. I would definitely say that it's RPGs in particular, and especially the indie RPGs. These are long burn tales. Like your sales curve isn't like, well, let me get on camera. Isn't like it is that, but this pit is very high. So you're gonna sell less in the beginning and then more on a month to month basis. So you are going to take a long time to make your money back, probably, unless you go super hyper viral. This is true of the Bioware RPGs and the Bethesda RPGs. I mean, there's a reason why Skyrim didn't sell its whatever it is now 40 million copies in its first year. Most games sell 75 to 90% of their copies in their first year. Most RPGs, that's not the case. So if you're making an RPG, be prepared for it to take a long time. I guess this was related. How would I structure teams and processes if I was going to try to make Baldur's Gate 1 today? So I would be tempted to build... I think if with the Baldur's Gate 1, because it's kind of... because it's very very tabletop D&D, what I would be tempted to do is to make self-contained level pods. So you have a person that's drawing the level. You have a combat designer. You have a writer. You have a scripter / everything else person, and you have almost like you almost try to black box the levels. So it's like, okay, when I come into this level, what do I know? What don't I know? What will I know coming out of this level? And yes, you can random access these levels to some degree, but you kind of black box them as much as you can. There are dangers in that, and I've seen some projects where you do that and then you try to stitch the pieces together and you're like, oh no, this level is like super dark horror and this level is comedy level, and when they touch, it's like matter and antimatter, and it's like the game explodes at the contact point. So you need somebody sitting above it to keep things at least close-ish. But I would be tempted to almost treat it, a game like Baldur's Gate 1, I'd be almost tempted to treat it like 20 games that are built with the same systems and rules that you join together at the end. I don't know. I'm saying that, not sure. Pill's Eternity is pretty good. Okay. What am I going to say about Pill's Eternity? I actually don't like Pillars of Eternity, but that's a me problem, not a Pillars of Eternity problem, if that makes sense. I've talked about Pillars of Eternity a lot because it is exactly what it's trying to be, to my mind, and it turns out that I don't want that anymore. I don't want a spiritual successor to the Baldur's Gate series, or to Planescape, or whatever they're trying to do. They're doing it, and they're succeeding. It turns out I just don't really want that. Woof. Okay. I said in one of the videos that it was only with Dragon's Inquisition the team figured out it was all about the characters. Main plots were ancillary to the journey the players go on with the team. Something that I can't articulate changed in how these characters are written, starting with Andromeda, and the dialogue went from having me glued to the screen, feeling emotions, to them sometimes being intolerable. So, here's what I actually think actually changed with the characters in after Inquisition. I think that what happened was that we went through a Joss Whedon period. When we eventually talk about Veilguard, I'll talk about this in more detail, but quippy Whedon-esque dialogue went into vogue at around the time period of Dragon Age, or of Mass Effect Andromeda. And it was very out of favor by the time Veilguard came out, but a lot of the writing was done while it was in vogue. So a lot of it was that. It's just that. It's not. It's taste change, and taste changed into that, and then changed back, and unfortunately, it was a little bit too late. So, yeah, I think it's that. I think also as well, there's a certain amount of I think you have to be willing to torture your characters, and sometimes maybe the writers were shying away a bit away from that a little bit. But I think it's much more the just Whedon-esque dialogue was super in vogue for a while. It's hard to remember that now, but it was, and now it isn't. And yeah. What do I think about quite narrow niche RPG like Tyranny or Age of Decadence? I think, I think there's room for most kinds of games, even things I would never consider playing. Yeah, and honestly, if you are super hyper niche and you go in knowing you're super hyper niche, that is possibly a better way to go, because what you're going to get, if you can find that audience, they're going to be very invested, and you're going to potentially hit a much larger percentage of that much smaller group. So if I just make a generic RPG, I'm going to get 1/10 of 1% of 1% potentially of people paying attention to me. If I make a cooking RPG, or I make a horror RPG, or I make something else that is much more niche, if I can get that audience to realize I exist, then I might get 20% of that audience or 50% of that audience. And that potentially is bigger than getting the tiny, tiny sliver across everywhere. So even if it's a game that I would never, ever, ever play, I do think that it's a viable strategy. Do I offer any kind of consulting services regarding pitching to publishers? I did not put the. I did. This is not a plant. I do. I do offer services around that, because definitely if you're pitching into one of the big publishers, that's where most of my experience is. If you're pitching into one of the smaller groups, Devolver Digital or that, not a place I have a ton of experience with. I can probably help, but you might be able to find someone with a bit more experience there that might be able to help more. But yeah, I do offer consulting from conception to shipping. Absolutely. Guardians of the Galaxy, yeah, it does do quippy. I like it. It's actually but it didn't do super well. It's also coming in late in that cycle of people being kind of tired of it. So Josh Sawyer said Pillars 1 and 2 were his most compromised game because they wanted Baldur's Gate instead of what he wanted. Yeah, that seems probable. So actually, there you go. Going back to the earlier question of how would I fund? If you are funding through Kickstarter, I guess, I always thought of it as unencumbered money, but I guess no. It sounds like what Josh is saying is that it's just as encumbered. In fact, it possibly more encumbered than any other money. So keep that in mind. If you're going to do a Kickstarter, it's going to tie your hands possibly more than a venture capitalist is going to. Is there a lighter version of Stop Killing Games that I think that I would have supported? So I do think there's room for legislation here. At the very least, I think we need to strengthen our communication. I don't think it is okay that we say buy a game and then the reality is that you are licensing the game. Like, that doesn't feel good to me. So at the very least, let's clean that up. Either you're buying it or you're not. And if you're buying it, then there should be some expectation of something. Now, could you rephrase that in a way that I would be more comfortable with? Yeah. Like, you buy access to an amusement park, but it's not forever. So there are ways. So for me, a lot of it's on the communication side. I think that we have, as an industry, intentionally obfuscated this, and I don't like that we're trying to have our cake and eat it too. I think we should choose a lane and do that. I think there is... Okay, so I'm not exactly sure how you would write this legislation, but I do wonder if there is at least something that says, if you shut down the servers, you lose the right to go after people if they decide to spin up fan servers. So I'm not saying you have to give up the code, not saying that you have to keep the servers up forever, just saying if you shut the servers off, if someone wants to try to reverse engineer your servers, they're allowed to. Because a lot of these fan server initiatives exist in a legal gray area. Chances are no one's going to go after them, but it's not clear that no one could. So if you just made it clear that no one could, I think that would be good. So yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes, there are versions of this that I would support, but it would have to be crafted carefully. You have to consider the unintended consequences as well, because if you are too draconian, what you could end up with is something that literally kills off entire genres of games, because the response is, oh, if I have to keep these servers up forever, then I just won't make the games that require these servers, because I know eventually they will drain all the profit out of my company. So you need a way so that the game developers can reduce their costs to zero on the ongoing support of a game without incurring any further risks. And the danger is you have to, like, playable, and like all of these words are really vague, and you would have to really lock it down. But I think it is doable. Sorry, just looking at questions in the comments. What do I think about the articles on gaming sites that are written from the info on my videos? Do they get what you mean? Sometimes they are cherry picking to make better titles. One thing I would say is I seem to be able to generate a lot more traffic not on my YouTube channel than on my YouTube channel. So maybe I should get better at clickbait. I don't know. It annoys me a little bit when I put out a video that gets 5,000 views, and then there's like 67 articles that each get 150,000 engagements. It's annoying, but it's fine. Like, this channel exists for reasons beyond just growing my subscriber number, but sometimes I forget that. What direction do I see the AAA game space going in the next 5 to 10 years? Seems like we're in the middle of a serious market correction between development costs exploding, shrinking demand as median gamer age rises, and consoles no longer being affordable. Its computing costs more than double. I don't know that demand is actually shrinking. I do think we will eventually see streaming actually work. And streaming is something that asks for slightly different games than we've been obsessed with right now. Like, you probably don't want to be playing a competitive live service game on your streaming service because you're getting double the latency and yeah. But single player games I've played single player games on streaming services, and they usually work amazing. So we may see that. I think that we're hollowing out the space between, let's say, Skyrim and Horizon Zero Dawn. Let's use those as the two breakpoints. So what we may actually be seeing is the legitimate creation of quadruple A. It won't just be Grand Theft Auto anymore. And then AAA is going to maybe back away, and rather than making all these games that have to sell 12 million copies to break even, we make games that can only have to sell 6 million copies to break even. And so we get slightly smaller, slightly lower fidelity game, but not as much as you might think. So you half the budget, but maybe you get 80% of the fidelity. Maybe. That's what I hope is going to happen. Live service is a hell of a drug, is what I would say. When the Anthem team was trying to figure out how the mech suits were going to work, how much were they looking at other mech games in the space? Generally, how much of that kind of research happens? I don't know. A huge touch point for Anthem was actually Diablo. I don't know that. I don't actually know the answer to that question. So I guess I'll do another question. How do not fall into despair as a game developer in the current industry climate? Yeah. Hold on. Now's not a good time to leave your job unless you have another one lined up, is what I would say to that. Has the location of Edmonton had any influence on any of the worlds BioWare's created? Yeah, actually, you notice it more than anything in the wildernesses in Dragon Ages mostly. Is that I realized this as I traveled a bit more, is that a lot of the general kind of foresty areas look a lot more Edmonton-y than I realized. So yeah, and MDK2 actually even calls out Edmonton in one of the early cutscenes. So yeah. What do I think about the assumption from players that studios rarely change people? We always see people say, "Oh, this studio is not the same that did X game, which is normal for me." So meaning like, yeah, I remember. So I do think there is a certain degree of, what am I going to say here? So a studio can survive a fairly significant number of people leaving. But there is a point beyond which it is going to probably lose its way. Because this is the video I did about how's the water, is that what the existing people at a studio are, is they are people who know what the water, they know there's water. They may not be able to state it. In fact, they can't state it. If they could state it, this wouldn't be a problem. They're aware that this is the kind of thing we do. This is how we do it. There's a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of culture. There's a bunch of unspoken knowledge that exists. And if you can lose pretty key people, you can lose fairly large numbers of people, and still have enough to absorb new people. But if you lose too many, or you grow too fast, and you sort of overwhelm that culture, then the studio can drift and go somewhere else and lose its way. But yeah, like I noticed it on Veilguard after I left, on before it was called Veilguard, is that it's newsworthy that Matt Goldman is leaving. It's newsworthy that that I'm leaving. It's not really newsworthy that like just a person within the dev studio is leaving. And for some reason, I guess because the news outlets were primed to look for this, it became news. There were 5 or 6 times where news articles were written when relatively junior people left, and that's happening all the time. A studio that has 10% turnover would be considered having a very low turnover. That means that every year, 10% of your staff are leaving. So most studios are actually quite a bit higher than that. It just doesn't usually make the news. Do I think having this YouTube channel and interacting with the community almost every week has changed my perspective on the gaming community in any way? Looking back at my career, do you think having a community like this around would have helped with the decision making or given you a different perspective on some of the decisions you had to make? Honestly, my answer to this is a no with an asterisk. I've always so since 2011 when I joined Twitter, I've always had a pretty open dialogue with the community. Now there are definitely problems with any community because you're going to get a self-selected group that is not going to be representative of your actual player base. And I would say that BioWare has definitely made missteps over the years by assuming that the people that are talking to them are representative of the larger audience and not just a subset of that audience. So I don't. This is different than me being on Twitter, me being the unofficial second community manager for Anthem, but I don't feel like would have resulted in me making any different decisions. That being said, I do think that you need to have a conversation with the community in some way, and I think that one of the massive missteps that Veilguard made was being too quiet and not having that conversation. But I tried. If you buy an amusement, if you're in an amusement park, you buy a ticket for a predetermined time. If you buy a gondola machine, it's yours. Publishers want to pretend to sell tickets while charging machine money. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is I do think that the number one thing that needs to be improved is communication. If you are selling me a ticket, then make it very clear you're selling me a ticket. Don't pretend like you're selling me. Don't pretend like you're selling me an amusement park, and all you're doing is selling me admission. Dragon Age Origins TV UI. I am not sure what that question is. Do you think we'll continue to see a decline in Western games compared to East Asia and European games, or is it just a fade like mandatory QTEs? So we're definitely seeing we're seeing a couple of things. Western game devs more expensive than Eastern European, East Asian game devs. So there is an active push to move development there. And one of the ways that started was with outsourcing. What we're now seeing is a bunch of people who grew up in the outsourcing companies saying, wait a minute, I could just do this myself. And they are doing it themselves. So we will probably see a decline for a little bit of time, but I do think the Western studios will figure it out, and they'll back away from the precipice, and they will find a balance again. This has happened before. We saw the decline of Japanese studios, and they're not gone. So we're not done, but we're not going to see them go away. If eventually we see a sharp ethical increase in productivity efficiency from generative AI, do I think AAA companies will use that increase to make games quicker or make larger games at roughly the pace they've become accustomed to demanding? I don't know why exactly, but none of the technological innovations that have happened during my entire 25 years of game development have resulted in games being made faster. They have just resulted in games being either pushed to a higher fidelity or gotten bigger. So it's hard to imagine that we will see anything different if AI actually gets pushed here. What we're seeing, like a lot of AAA games are using generative AI, they're just using it for code. And it's not making things faster. It's actually probably making things slightly slower. But it is believed that it's going to make things cheaper. We'll see. But so it's hard to imagine that games will be made faster because nothing in that I've seen in 25 years has ever resulted in games being made faster. What do I think about cheat code games and why have they disappeared? Yeah, it gave so much fun sometimes. So I don't know why they have disappeared. I guess it's partially so often games will have some sort of debug console that you can bring up, but it's not quite the same sort of like up, up, down, down, left, right, BA start sort of stuff. Partially it's disappeared, I would guess, because a lot of this stuff has moved. A lot of things that used to be kooky little weird things have moved into DLC land. A lot of things, the other thing that's happened is that Easter eggs, on larger teams, Easter eggs are usually strongly discouraged because they can result in big problems. You can end up in a situation where you end up offside with the ESRB and your E-rated game suddenly becomes an M-rated game because you put a naked person in it somewhere as an Easter egg. So partially it's that. Partially bigger teams means it's harder to do bigger Easter eggs. So yeah, I like them, but I think we just don't think that way. We're more mature as an industry, and this is one of the sort of bits of whimsy that's a casualty of that, I guess. Which canceled games, either ones worked on or ones that we're anticipating, would I most want to see brought back and finished? So I was really excited about Mass Effect Corsair. Not viable. There's lots of reasons why it's not viable, but Mass Effect Corsair was the DS game that I started that was going to be like you flew around in Mass Effect universe with a little crew and you were like kind of like pirates or Star Control, that kind of thing. I'd love to see a game like that. But there's lots of reasons why that wasn't actually possible. What do I think about Pathfinder Kingmaker? I didn't play it. I've heard good things, but I didn't play it. So maybe so going back to base building. This is the question about base building, and I said base building and RPGs don't really go together. I think that's probably wrong. It's just that like something like Factorio, base building is 100% of what you're doing. I do think that there is something powerful about base building in an RPG because it can become another character, but you have to do it. So Inquisition doesn't really do it. Like it's cosmetic. It doesn't make a difference. You never got to. We gave you this toy and never let you play with your toy. You got to let me play with my toy, and so you have to be prepared to commit for it to be worth it. I'm assuming that Kingmaker does, and if so, that is then that's probably works great. Yeah. I'll just quickly blow a couple here. Labor laws are different in different countries. Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, you can. I mean, let's be honest. In North America, if you have a salaried employee, you can pretty much treat them like shit. But yes, there are places where you can treat them even worse, for sure. Yeah, so the ability to make the game twice as fast won't put $60 to $100 extra in the consumer's pocket to spend. Better put those resources to making sure that your game is the one that gets bought. I think that's what's got us into this trouble in the first place. Is that everyone is just trying to, um, um, everyone is just trying to be the best, make the best screenshots, and there's truth to that. With 8,000 games or 15,000 games, you need to rise out of the noise. But there's a point at which you are basically, like, if you're pricing yourself to barely surviving, that's how we get to here, where you're retracting, and maybe that's the reality. Um, which of the game worlds that I've been involved in when making what I like to vacation in the most? I mean, I can't imagine vacationing in any of these worlds. They're awful. Um, uh, Dragon Age is an awful world. Mass Effect, if I guess is Mass Effect's not bad if you're not literally in the middle of a galaxy-ending apocalypse. Um, uh, yeah, so none. Um, what do I view as good practice for hard game modes? What makes them more or less fun or appropriately challenging? So ideally, you are doing more than just dialing up the damage and the hit points. That's a very easy way to do it. And sometimes it gets you a long way there. Like the difference between normal and hard. So if we imagine we have 5 difficulties, and we have normal in the middle, and then we have hard, and we have very hard. Hard, you might be able to get away with. Everyone has more hit points. Everyone does more damage. But ideally, what you want is you want there to be more than that. So the block windows are your block windows are tighter, or the enemy has slightly more aggressive AI, or that sort of thing, because that is because that's going to give you a better experience. But that's also, of course, makes it much more difficult to balance. Um, but you can kind of get a ways there just with math, and then you got to figure out what you need to push it the rest of the way. Um, yeah, I mean, I've talked to some software engineers. Sorry, talking about AI for coding. I've talked to some software engineers who I respect, and the way they talked about AI, their use of AI, was they treated them as if they were a brand new junior level coder. They can't trust anything the thing writes, but there are things it can do that just take some stuff off their plate. So maybe there is maybe there's something there. Yeah, I totally forgot about base building in Fallout 4 as well. So so maybe I'm totally wrong about this. Because the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, I totally do want some base building in my RPGs. So, I'll just do one more Gen AI. Do I think a lot of games are using Gen AI for coding and art? I think a lot of games are using Gen AI for coding. I do. I think it's something that I think it's 2 reasons. It's hard to get caught, and I actually think that as a general rule, the average player is a lot less against that. They don't know why, but it feels less icky to them. For art, some are, but less, because right now it's a poison pill, and so most devs are steering away from it. Um, is the Western and Eastern games divide really meaningful? No, it's not. I really think when people are actually asking questions like that, what they're really saying is North America versus everybody else, to be honest. Maybe North America and France, because they have a fairly big dev there. After seeing leaks, I made a realization that Rockstar does a great job of keeping a consistent tone, art, direction, overall vibe between sequels. Why do I think BioWare, especially Dragon Age and Volition, Saints Row, have changed their dreams so directly? Well, Dragon Age, I can tell you, is it worth risking alienating an established fan base in the hopes of attracting a new one rather than evolving the identity that made the franchise successful? So, yeah, Dragon Age, it was very intentional because Dragon Age has never been allowed to be Dragon Age. Dragon Age has always been pushed by the greater organization to find a larger audience, to be less nerdy, to reach a broader audience. And I guess it basically worked for Inquisition and then didn't work all the other times. It was intentional. Is it a good idea? No, but that's the reality. I think Mass Effect is pretty consistent. Is pretty tonally consistent. Dragon Age, yeah, it was definitely for sure on purpose. Saints Row, I think it actually really worked. Saints Row 1 to 2, they went sort of silly, and I think that really worked for them. Otherwise, they would have just been I think they would have just been a GTA game, a clone that you'd never heard of. So it can absolutely work, but it is absolutely a risk. Okay, sorry. Just looking. Do I think that building a game with cuts in mind has an effect on what narrative can be constructed? It does. One of the problems that, because actually what ends up kind of happening, what's happened on most of the games that I've led is that you build with cuts in mind, but you don't do it enough. So what ends up happening is you end up cutting back to the trunk, and then you have the trunk. Because if you build the entire game, if you build it 100% modularly, nothing can be connected to anything else in a deep way, because you don't know what's going to survive. However, there are ways. Campfires in the Dark, which is the fail better strategy. So everything is aware of everything else, but only in these broad ways, is a really effective way to maintain that connection and allow yourself some scalability. But yeah, absolutely. If everything in the game could be cut, nothing in the game can assume anything else exists. There are ways to work around that, but yeah, it's going to absolutely have an impact. Are video game budgets and development times finally stopping, or is the industry still marching towards the cliff? I think we're finally turning away from the edge. GTA 6 could make everyone turn their cars around and start driving in that direction again. I don't think so. Historically, Grand Theft Auto has had less of an impact on the industry than you would imagine, because a $2 billion budget is actually kind of easy to say, well, I don't have a $2 billion budget, so I can't be a lunatic. But yeah, I do see some evidence that we are turning back. Now, I would argue that essentially what happened is that most studios Wile E. Coyote themselves off the edge of the cliff, are floating over midair and have just realized that and are desperately trying to get back to the edge of the cliff. So it's not that we were marching towards the cliff. I think a lot of studios already marched off the edge of the cliff, and now we're trying to grab the edge and pull themselves back. But yeah, there is some evidence that that is actually happening. Oh, that's interesting. A lot of the Dawn Walker makes enemies have less hit points, but makes them more aggressive. Oh, interesting. Do I think there's some code quality practices that bring the most bang for buck for a team? Game tapes are... yeah, I mean, I'm not up to date on current... I haven't worked professionally as a programmer for 18 years now. But I would say, biggest bang for the buck, have a coding standard. Like, have a format your code like this. And I actually kind of feel like, maybe this is just me being old, I feel like some teams have backed away from some of the conventions that we used to have because the compilers, the IDEs have gotten so much better that they've moved away from some of the naming conventions because they feel like it's not necessary anymore. But I feel like there's just a readability that comes with some of those, like old school camel case, like name your member variables like this, name your local variables like this. So I would say, number one, just have a coding standard. And then, yeah, I'm sure there are lots of other things that are probably worthwhile. In the current video game industry, it appears that the people who make the games are getting more pushback or restrictions from corporate executives on what they can and cannot do when interacting with their communities, potentially forming connections to developer instead of the brand. Has this been something you've noticed? Do you think is a problem or even a thing? So, kind of. So actually, I kind of feel like it's both. Definitely PR organizations, so if you're working within a big publisher, they want to be in control of the communications. So that can really put a damper of having that interaction with the community. However, I just did it, and I'm the EP of the project, so they can F off. And I think that the reality is that it's doable. And I wish more. And so what I actually see for the most part is actually the opposite thing happening, which is game teams, studios are becoming too quiet and not interacting with their community. And I think that's happening for a different reason. It's happening because they're afraid of interacting with their community because of the pushback. And what's happened because of that is that the members of the dev team who have social media presences but are not trained to be doing this are ending up being the unintentional mouthpieces of the studios. So what I would rather see is an official channel, and then a few very senior people who are blessed to be communicating with the communities, doing that, and then everyone else is essentially invisible. Because now, to some degree, if you have those senior voices, those other people will largely be invisible anyway, more invisible. But the modern social media algorithms are going to surface them to some degree, and you kind of don't want that. So, so what I saw happening on Veilguard, for example, is that the EP, the creative director, the official social media channels, basically silent. As a result, people found anyone that was willing to engage with them. Those people that they engaged with really shouldn't have been engaging with them, and it didn't go well. So I would rather they not be quiet, but be hidden a little bit, and there be louder, more official channels that could bear the brunt of that. So I don't think it's coming. So I'm sort of challenging the base of the question, but also sort of agreeing with it. There is some corporate stuff saying we want to be 100% in control of our messaging. That is real. But I don't think that's the main thing that's causing this silence. Yeah, AI coding engines have replaced Stack Overflow. I think that's exactly what's happened. Have I finished BG3 yet? No, and I kind of don't think I will. Yeah, so I do think that they are. So I do think BG3 is doing storytelling through characters in BG3. I am curious what Divinity is going to be like, because I feel like going back to my, what are you, say it out loud. I feel like, and I can't quite articulate this, but I feel like Larian's games before BG3 were different than BG3. So now the question is Larian is Larry and BG3? Is that what they are? Are they going to change what they are? Or are they going to sort of revert back to some degree to what they were before? And I'm not sure I can quite state what they are or what they were, but I do feel like there's been a shift, and they should think about that. What's my favorite discarded feature from a game I've worked on? So on Joplin, I guess we had we were trying to do. I talked before about can we do conversations as more like combat? So the feature was called. It was supposed to be about running cons. It was called Cons Without Pros, which I didn't realize until months after it was named that was a play on words. But it was designed to be a way to have a social interaction with someone without actually having to write bespoke dialogue for it. It didn't really work, and maybe it couldn't work, but I am really interested in that space. In my opinion, one of the consequences of less people job hopping as a result of reduced overall hiring would be on industry as a whole. That's an interesting question. I don't know that I've really thought about that. I certainly didn't do a lot of job hopping, but I have worked with people who thought that if you stayed at a company more than 2 years, you were an idiot. There is certainly some degree of idea mixing that happens whenever people are moving around a lot. So we might see a certain degree of divergent evolution happen if it stays like this for a long time. Let's say that we basically are like this for 10 years. I hope not. But let's say we are like this for 10 years. So people are... So overall overall turnover goes way down. So let's say we enter this world where we just sort of freeze in place. So layoffs stop, but we also are essentially hiring frozen everywhere. So people basically stay where they are. Then what I would expect to happen is that we get a certain degree of drift, which could be actually really interesting for the industry, because what you would get is a lot of more slightly different things happening, and maybe you have a better opportunity to find new solutions to things. I mean, to some degree, that's what we saw in the 90s, because mobility was lower, the internet was weaker, and so you got different solutions to the same problem popping up. So that's interesting. I don't know, but it's an interesting question. What's the best strategy to address the loud influencers that target specific games to rage bait and generate clicks while polluting the discourse? I don't have an answer to this one. I do think that... So, okay, I lied. I do have an answer to this one. I think the best strategy is to have an open dialogue with the positive parts of your community. If you are talking with a large group of people and you are giving them information and you have an open dialogue and you're giving them bad news and good news and they are engaged parts of the conversation, then when these bad actors show up, you have an already trained and enthusiastic force that can combat that. If you aren't having that dialogue, if you aren't engaging in that conversation, then when these people come up, it's too late. They get to dominate the conversation. So you have to start earlier when they don't care. When you're not news, you can try to start, form your community, strengthen them, make them engaged, give them all this news, don't hide from them. Then, when you are a big enough deal that the bad actors are showing up and trying to generate clicks off of you, you have 5, 10, 50, 100, a million people that are willing to fight on your side. If you don't do it, then you kind of, there's nothing you can do. You've lost control of the narrative. You have to do it beforehand. What upcoming game am I looking forward to most? Well, so my trite answer is not because I'm actually interested in playing GTA 6. I'm interested in GTA 6 coming out because I think the next 3 or 4 years of the industry is being held hostage by that game. What am I paying attention to? I'm trying to think. My mind is blanking in terms of other things. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what I'm looking forward to. Usually there's something, but then I forget about it. I guess nothing is the actual answer because nothing jumping to mind, which is sad. Will I ever show what's inside the Red Book of Dragon Age? We'll see. Probably, maybe. I don't know. If I had the budget of Rockstar in a reasonable time, what game would you make? Or what feature do you think your team could finally implement? If I had a $2 billion budget, like if you gave me a $2 billion budget right now and said you have to spend it on game dev, I would not make one game. And I would not make 5 games at $400 million each. I would make 100 games at $20 million each. Because I don't have the slightest idea what the hell I would do with $2 billion. Yeah. How much did Shattered Steel influence BioWare, like them being able to... I don't know that it really influenced them that much. It's kind of a weird story. It kind of entered BioWare through the back door. Like, essentially, BioWare acqui-hired... I can't remember the name of Trent Studio, but Trent Studio making Shattered Steel. So, I don't know that it really... I mean, probably in sort of the... Oh, we were a medical software company and now we're a game company. Maybe I'm not sure, but I don't think it had huge influences beyond maybe that. How is development structured between Jade Empire, Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2? So the thing that BioWare used to have is so it's always had this matrix structure. So people reported into 2 people effectively. They reported into a departmental person and they reported into their project. And the actual reporting usually it meant that it was the same person. But what that meant was that if you were an artist, you were a member of the art department, and also you were part of a project like Jade Empire. What that meant was that when it was working at its best, it meant that a lot of the performance was being handled by the departments. EA hates that. So the reason it hates it actually makes a certain amount of sense, because what it means is that the person that is most responsible for the performance of an individual actually isn't on the project. They are outside the project, and they care about the craft as opposed to about the production realities. So EA's feeling was, does that mean that if they're not getting their work done, but they're doing it to a high quality, that they're going to get a good review? And the answer to that is kind of yeah. Not really, but kind of. So EA's definitely been pushing more and more to not that the matrix goes away, but the power structure is the reverse. At most EA studios, people report into a production person, and that person is the most important person involved in their performance evaluation. And there are problems with that too, and I think the problems with that may be bigger than the problems of the Strongs department. But historically, yeah, BioWare's had strong departments, weaker production, weaker production. Yes, Reddit AMAs can still be a disaster even when moderated by leadership. Sure, they can be. I've done them, and I think it can be done. Do I think there's going to be a Dragon Age 5? I don't know how a Dragon Age 5 happens right now. Because, if EA does not sell the IP or the studio off, which I don't know if they will or not. If they don't, I don't have the slightest idea who remains at BioWare who would pitch another Dragon Age. So it basically never gets pitched. If they put it on the block to sell, I think there are people who would buy it, and then you probably do get something. But first, you probably get a bunch of remasters and remakes to try to get money out of the IP as quickly as possible. Do I think that Sven from Larian is using Generate? Hasn't he said that he is? Didn't they say they were for something? I can't remember what, but I think they actually said they were using it. Yeah, so I think that I think there are huge problems with generative AI, and I think it's eating its own tail in terms of creativity right now. Um, so I've poked at it a couple of times, and I do worry sometimes. Sometimes I worry that it's a tool that I'm not learning how to use, and sometimes I feel like it's just a plagiarism machine that's eating its own tail. I have not engaged with it deeply, and I hope that doesn't blow up in my face, but so far that's where my attitude is on it. Ow. What are the main technical implications of factors in BioWare's city hub designs throughout Mass Effect and Dragon Age series? So, the Dragon Age, or BioWare's never had really good lightweight crowds. So our cities have always been a little bit underpopulated because of that. And I think if you really wanted to do a good city, you should start with it like it should be like one of your top 3 features. And you should go in and say, okay, well, to do this, we need to have really, you basically need sort of 3 or 4 levels of people. So you've got, I'm a background character that you can't even get to, so I'm essentially just a chair. You've got, I move around, but you can't interact with me. You've got, I am an NPC, maybe you can talk to me, maybe I talk. And then you've got, I'm a full conversation character. And you really need those to be 4 different things. And the top one, the I'm a chair with arms, is you need to be able to put hundreds of those things on screen. So that's been a big limitation because we've never really considered cities important enough to really, truly invest in it. Because always, everything you're doing, every decision you're making in game development, if you're choosing to do one thing, you're choosing not to do something else. And this has always been on the choosing not to do. Could BioWare do better? Absolutely. It would just have to do it at the expense of some other feature that it was choosing not to do. What do I think of the rising co-development, particularly with non-North American studios? It's a natural evolution of outsourcing. I think it's a natural evolution of outsourcing, but I do think to some degree, when the question from before, what's happening with Western developers, is what you're doing is you're training your replacement to some degree. You're paying your replacement to train itself, is what you're actually doing. Is that you're taking a studio that before was basically only capable of, say, doing 3D modeling, and you're uplifting them and turning them into a real dev studio. You're giving them experience with design, with leadership, with everything. So the fact that they then turn around and make their own game shouldn't be too surprising. Yeah, Witcher 3 is getting an expansion. I know that's amazing, isn't it? Would I be interested in an expansion of one of your old games? Yeah. Honestly, I think that's a really cool idea. So let's imagine for a second that Dragon Age is available. Like, there's something really interesting of let's make an expansion for all of the game, all 4 of them. Let's do something for all 4 of them, and we'll tie that with we're going to release a remaster. So with this new content, but we're also just going to release that content with the original games as well. I think that's just a really cool idea. Like, I think I have to give CD Projekt Red props for the way that they think about the way that their game is perceived in the marketplace. They've been really good, both in their choice of language, but also just in the stuff that they've done. Oh, hey, I kind of feel like we just talked about this. Why do I think East makes such a strong comeback in gaming and at award shows? Partially, it's because there are a lot more studios doing it now than before, especially in China. In part because of what we've been talking about in terms of the outsourcing studios realize they can do it too. Partially, it's because I think there's just a little bit of fatigue in the West in terms of the games the West is making. But like someone said, I think this dichotomy is pretty false. And I think within a few years, I'm not sure that we'll be having this conversation any longer. What do I think of a Dragon Age game that is treated as the last and is where your prior choices can actually have plot divergence? Yeah, so that's kind of what Origins is, right? Like, it was a game that wasn't really planning to have sequels, and so there's a lot of stuff that we wallpaper over in following games that are very, very different. I think you can do a lot of divergence that you can still recover from. I think Mass 3, it's like, okay, well, I don't know how you recover from that. I guess we'll see. Do I think a big publisher might fund a game from a team that is previously not shipped? They do. Usually, if you have some sort of track record doing other stuff. So if you're an outsourcing studio or an insourcing studio or a co-dev studio, you could probably find a publisher because you've shown that you can make stuff. If you have a group of people that have a pedigree, then you can probably get them because, again, you've shown that you can ship stuff. If you're small, EA especially loves they fund little studios if you're small enough, because especially if they feel like you'll be good PR for them. So the answer is yes, but not everyone, for sure. So BioWare's worked with some really impressive composers, Trevor Morris, Hans Zimmer. How do you go about finding convincing someone of their caliber? So EA used to have, I don't remember if they still, Steve Schnurr was the head of the EA music division. So he had all those contacts. I think he's still there. But, these days, gaming is a big enough deal that sometimes these things kind of fall in your lap. They didn't fall in the lap of BioWare. BioWare was always going through people who already knew people who knew people. But sometimes people are looking, and you can get someone of higher caliber than you might expect because they just want to get into games. Like, they want to have a game on their resume. And sometimes that'll get you there. Yeah, okay, Larry said they used generative AI for concept art. I thought they had said that. Okay, there you go. Okay. IGA generation prototyping. Well, that's concept art of concept art. Sure. I mean, sure, they're drawing a line somewhere, but I mean, you'd have to see their exact process to see where that line is. If Dragon Age went for a full sequel reset, a full franchise reset, what I want to see, I can't imagine doing that. Like, why would you, if you're going to reset the franchise, why would you do that? Why not just make something new? I'm going to be honest. Divinity Original Sin 2 was definitely doing storytelling through characters, but it wasn't as good as BG3. Really the point of the game. Mark Lee certainly didn't focus on it as much as BG3. Yeah, that's my feeling. So maybe BG3 represents what Larian has always been trying to do, and they just finally got there. But I don't feel like that doesn't feel true to me. It feels like they've been trying to be something else, and then they ended up here. So the question is this where they want to be, or do they want to be somewhere else? And I guess they better figure that out. Do you ever seek out videos where people analyze or critique games you've worked on? has watching someone other's perspective on your work ever made you see one of your games just differently? I don't seek these sorts of things out, but yeah, sometimes I've had people make reasoned arguments about stuff. Like some of my thinking on power in Inquisition comes from people's thoughts on that game, and I think they have a point. So yes, this is why you engage with your community, because your community can tell you stuff, and sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. But if you're not listening, you'll never know. Veilguard did have larger populations. The NPCs weren't that interactive. Yeah. So Veilguard is doing more with its because cities were seen as more important in Veilguard than other games. So there's more investment done there. But I feel like it's missing. It's got two of the four things I said, well, three of the four things, and it's missing. So it's got this is a person that I can actually talk to. It's got I'm a chair, and it's got a few wander around people, though that's a not fully fleshed out system. It's missing the that I'm almost an NPC people that are moving around and talking. It's better, but and you can see it's the game invested more and it did a better job. It could invest twice as much again and probably get something really pretty good. Hindsight be 2020. Do I think the Dragon Age should have been a trilogy instead of a planned 5 games? I mean, planned 5 games is honestly quite a stretch. It kind of is a trilogy, and if there ever is a Dragon Age 5, I think the Dragon Age 5 will underscore that, because so the plan would have been the last plan I had would have been effectively to have a trilogy, Origins, Dragon Age 2, Inquisition, and then you would have had another 3 that would have been another 3 which would have been sort of the Veilguard-y area, not exactly that, but one plan would have been 3 games with Rook or 2 games with Rook, and then 2 games and 2 games and 2 games. Effectively, it kind of actually is that way. Okay, sorry, question just scrolled up the top, so I better. Am I currently still in game development? Yes, I do consulting with studios, though 2026 has been pretty. I'm slowly getting shorter. 2026 has been pretty brutal for that. But yeah, and I'm on a bunch of boards in Alberta that are game development related as well. I'm just going to do a couple so I get onto the front page of this as well. What's with the separation of the upper section requiring fast travel in Valerio Market area and Inquisition? Why is it like that? I'm sure it's just tech. We probably couldn't make it load, I'm going to guess. I don't think it was added post-launch. I think it was just either it was done as a separate area and we just didn't really use it, or it was just that it couldn't load for a tech reason. Yeah, I mean, there was some, I don't really remember, the Zimmer thing for Veilguard happened while I was on Anthem, so I'm not exactly sure why that happened, other than certain people being interested in working with bigger names. I don't know. I don't think there's that much money being spent, even though it's Hans Zimmer. You could cut all the music and it's not going to get you much more anywhere else, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, so what Veilguard doesn't have is Veilguard is very stripped down to its just based on the reality of what it is that in terms of, if you make a game where everything is cuttable, then you cut everything to some degree. Veilguard has had most of its non-crit path and character interaction stripped away, and then some of it injected back in. So what you would want, and it's partially because of its multiplayer session, because why am I forgetting the name of the city? The city is not really that important if you're making a multiplayer game. So it got done relatively late. So you would, if you knew the game that you were making 2 years earlier, then you would do a lot more side quests and stuff in Veilguard in the cities for sure. There's still a lot of negative stuff going in the video game industry. Not to brush aside. Sometimes it feels good to look at possible silver linings. Do I have anything video game related that I'm personally excited or optimistic for? Tech innovations, new studios forming, new games. I do feel like we are seeing a potential new golden age for the AA studio, where games that are made for, let's say, under $100 million are finding big audiences. And so my ideal would be most of AAA just turns into that. I don't think that's what we'll see, but we're seeing some signs that that's working. We're seeing signs that AAA is backing away from the fidelity death cult, realizing that you can make slightly lower fidelity games and it's all going to be okay, and we're all taking the shotgun out of our mouth. So I am seeing strong signs of that. I hope it's what happens. GTA 6 could change everything, and probably not in a good way, but we'll see. I'm hoping it won't. I'm hoping that it will either have no effect, or people will just look at it and go, well, I can't make that, so I'll back even further away. That would be the hope. Yeah, I mean, so Veilguard has a lack of conversations that DAO had, where you can ask NPCs so many questions. Yeah, that's partially time. It's also partially just that tastes have moved on to some degree. Those sort of really deep, exhaustive conversation wheels. This is maybe arguably kind of the fidelity death cult. As presentation expectations have gone up in terms of way that you present conversations, the willingness to accept these very low fidelity stand and deliver kind of conversations has gone down. So a lot of that has fallen away. Now, to the detriment, arguably, I think that yeah, I don't know. Yes, you're right. I'm not sure that it's all negative. What would I envision for the next Dragon Age game? The executions, and where would it be in? I mean, I don't know. I don't really. I have not given Dragon Age much thought since I stopped working with the Veilguard team well before they shipped. Yeah, so instead of a last-effort attempt to make 3 games, 1 major expansion, 18 months, and try to get EA to fund Dragon Age, would I still want to do it that way? I do think that there's something to be... So maybe not 18 months. Maybe I wouldn't try to do Dragon Ages 18 months apart. But I think there is something to be said of... Like, let's get our timelines back into something a bit more reasonable. Like, could we do... Can you do a game... You take a team and you isolate it so that people aren't flowing in and out as much. And can you make a game in 2 years? And if not 2, how about 3? Because, I mean, Veilguard is 10, and that's too long. The industry changes too much underneath, so the game is both out of time and also out of date. And I think you need to try to pull that back in a lot. Um, do I think there is a possibility of one more CRPG Renaissance, which birthed Pillage Eternity and Wasteland, or is the next Renaissance going to be BG3 like Renaissance? I think we could see both, honestly. I think, okay, so this is gross. And I'm not saying I'm hoping for this, but what you could arguably do with Gen AI is generate a BG1 style 2D rendered map, um, and you could probably do that. Yeah, so you could probably with generative AI, you could probably make BG style maps pretty fast. They would be soulless, but you could probably do it. Sorry, we're off the page again. Is there a big if there's a big audience for RPGs? I don't think Larian considers Baldur's Gate 3 a CRPG. Yeah, I would consider it a CRPG. I mean, it's a fuzzy boundary. I mean, partially, I think my argument is that the UI is too icky to be an action RPG. Considering the huge wave layoffs in AAA studio publishers, do you think young professionals have a better chance of finding a job if they target smaller studios? So we talked about this a little bit before. I would say maybe. I would say it's worth a try because the job security you used to get from AAA is largely gone. So find a job where you can find it. Look everywhere. Don't take a job at a studio you don't like the values of, but otherwise, a job is a job is a job to some degree. Take what you can get. I'm not sure that you're getting any more security anywhere right at the moment. Do I think Baldur's Gate 3 is the natural evolution from Dragon Age if it were allowed to be itself, allowed to kill whoever you want, and having a lot of options? Do I think the protagonist is also an evolution? So the protagonist of Baldur's Gate 3 in a lot of ways is more like the protagonist of Baldur's Gate of the like this is you are a very specific thing. You can be any race, but you're a very specific thing. You've got the thing in your head, and there is a lot of power in that. If Dragon Age Origins continued along that road, I don't think we end up at Baldur's Gate 3. I don't know where we end up, but I'm not sure that we end up there. Thoughts on Alcad apparently having 600 devs, and are they still making CRPGs with a long post-release support tail? As far as I know, they are still making CRPGs. They are interesting. To me, it feels like they're trying to force themselves into AAA. Maybe just because they have a lot of devs in low-cost areas. So maybe it'll work. It'll be interesting to follow them because the Expanse looks interesting. So I would definitely follow them. I'm not sure how it's going to work because 600 is hard to manage. Thoughts on Godot for fairly ambitious RPGs? As far as I know, I don't know Godot very well. You should be able to do basically anything in Godot. It's not going to give you the top end of graphics, but if you're just looking for a big, so if you're going to make Baldur's Gate 2, you can make Baldur's Gate 2 in Godot. I don't see any reason why you couldn't. If you're going to make Dragon Age Origins, you could probably make Dragon Age Origins in Godot. If you're going to try to make Grand Theft Auto, I probably wouldn't try to make Grand Theft Auto 6 in Godot. It's probably going to come apart at the seams, I think. Do I agree that some part of the success of BG3 was due to the simplification of the narrative, hence more approachability for people who usually don't dive deep into thematic content? Maybe. I mean, it starts pretty weird, right? Like it's almost starting like a Planescape or a Spelljammer game. I don't know. So a game can become more successful if it's successful enough, and that is happening with Baldur's Gate 3. So there's some of that, and then I guess the fact that it's got the narrative that it has maybe allows people to not bounce off of it as quickly. But the truth of the matter is that tons of people buy Baldur's Gate 3 and bounce off of it. Like it's not super approachable. Its UI is hard to engage with if you're not familiar with D&D. There's a bunch of stuff with it that is not super approachable. So maybe I don't reject the statement, but I don't know. Are there any games that I enjoy that people wouldn't expect? So I like a lot of a game that I really liked was Dragon Ball Z Budokai, the first one, and the reason I like it is weird because it kind of is a very if you're interested in Dragon Ball Z but don't want to watch 600 million hours of tournament anime, I found it a really interesting way to deliver story. So yes, there are games like that, but like I don't like any of the sort of mainstream like shooters and things, mainly because I'm bad at them. And I took that while Veilguard took so long. It's also the size of several Bioware games. Yeah, it took me more time to finish the main quest than the side quest. Yeah, so as always, Bioware games end up being much bigger than they think they are, and Veilguard is no exception. It was not trying to be big, but it was trying to be big enough, and it ends up being actually very, very, very big. If you were going to make a remake of a Dragon Age game, would you go with UE5? If I was going to do a remake of it, yeah, I'd probably go UE5 because it gives you a certain amount of future-proofing as long as Epic doesn't go completely bananas. I would love to... So one thing I would love to consider doing is if you're going to do this, you remake the Dragon Ages and you make them in UE5. And then you basically keep them running forever. So UE6 comes out, you do it again, and you just keep them running. And then you build on that platform. I think there's something interesting there. Dragon Age is definitely more long-winded than Mass Effect. Sure, that's true. I think that's partially setting as well. I think that's partially military versus fantasy, but it's not all that. There are definitely parts of BG3 that don't make any sense. And definitely BG3 shipped with a really bad, really, really rocky Act 3. Yes, you saw me play Anthem, so you know how bad I am at shooters. So, can I say them publicly? What are my current rate for consulting? Well, let's say it's very highly variable depending on the studio or group I'm working with. I charge publishers more. I charge AAA more. I charge indie less. But no, I'm not gonna. It's a lot. Yeah, thought on Archetype Exodus coming out the same window as The Expanse. I find the way Archetype shows and talks about Exodus kind of annoying to follow. I found the Exodus gameplay kind of confusing as well, and so I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. I haven't talked to really that team very much, even though I know a bunch of people there, so I'm confused as to what they're doing as well, honestly. Oh, I guess I put this one in twice. Okay. Whoa! Copyright infringement or not, some games are classics that define genres and use certain words, terms, expressions for their design mechanics, and then are influenced. Many other games came after. If only some influenced games use that same terminology, how do I know if I'm in the clear, or if it's an established common term? So basically, they're asking like when is a term that is specific to a game, and when is it not? It's hard to know because hit points you can use. Usually, you can't copyright game mechanics, but you can copyright or trademark words. So I wouldn't use Phoenix Down, for example, for your revive, because that's probably like Final Fantasy is going to probably come after you. But like things like health gates and there's a lot of terms. If it's a generic sounding term, probably you're okay. You can't like if you were, you're not going to be able to copyright health points or stamina or things like that. So if they're fairly generic words, you're probably in the clear. But I'm not a lawyer, so if it's anything that is associated with their IP, then you're probably not in the clear. And then there's a fuzzy line in between, and you're potentially going to need to get a copyright lawyer involved. And unfortunately, the copyright lawyer is probably going to say, no, don't use this, even if you probably could get away with it. So it's sometimes you're just kind of rolling the dice. What's my ideal main critical quest line? Time to complete, number of main quests. What games do I think of the ideal set? So I like to be able to finish a game. And for me to finish a game, it needs to be under about 30 hours. So not Crit Path Rush 30 hours. More like meander through the game 30 hours. And I kind of feel like I'm in the majority there, despite the size of games. A lot of people make decisions on their buying based upon perceived value. So that's the weird thing. I think people want about 30-hour crit paths, but they buy longer things and then don't finish them. So that's what I want. Yeah, I mean, I actually I have to say for BG3s, people talking about BG3 in the chat, I found the UI quite frustrating. Like the actual in-world interact with the world part, not the screens. And I'm not entirely sure I can put a finger on exactly why it sort of bothers me. BioWare is now associated with single-player RPGs. Multiplayer efforts have been received with their share of criticism. Yet, Old Republic is an MMO success. How much did the Austin team feel like a traditional BioWare, or did they have their own distinct culture? They had their own culture. What did BioWare learn from making SWTOR? Not as much as they should have, to be honest. But there were people in Austin from BioWare Edmonton, this very senior people, that moved down to Austin to be on SWTOR. So there is a kernel, a seed of traditional BioWare there. But also there were people from MMOs as well that were also very senior. So it definitely developed its own culture. You definitely saw that in the interaction between the two teams on Anthem. But to answer the question of what did we learn from making it, not as much as we should have, to be honest. So what's my opinion on the permissible amount of jank in RPGs? As an example, games made by same Duo Serpent in Staglands, Mechjammer, Banquet for Fools, Janky. So I think that RPGs seemingly get away with a little bit more jank than most other games because they're usually single player experiences. So balance isn't as important, and if you glitch for a few seconds, it doesn't mean that you insta die. It depends. Like if I'm getting something that I can't get anywhere else, I'm going to accept a lot more jank than if I am getting something I can get somewhere else. So if I'm getting, so this is one of the problems that shooters face. If I'm getting a janky shooter, I can get a shooter that is almost exactly the same as this shooter without the jank. So that's unacceptable. I'm gonna think this game is terrible. If I'm getting an RPG, a lot of my experience with an RPG is the unique story. So the story essentially makes me a monopoly of like every RPG to some degree is kind of its own monopoly because it's the only place you can get this specific experience. As a result, the level of acceptable jank is significantly higher because I'm getting something I can't get anywhere else. It also means that they're not as accessible because if I don't like the story, then I don't like the game. What am I playing it for? Whereas with a shooter, a shooter with incredible mechanics, but a slightly different, like an art style that isn't quite what I might like, I might play it just for the mechanics. RPG, much less true. So RPGs can get away with a lot more jank than other games because of that. Da, 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 da. Yeah, I have to be honest with Exodus. I don't know. I like the way it's presented with all these time jumps and stuff. It seems like you should have massive, earth-shattering divergence, but I'm not sure if that's what's going to happen or not. It's not clear to me. RPGs also seem to be more likely to have a modding community. That does seem to be true. Maybe it's because there's just more you can do. With a modding community for a shooter, you can make a new map. That's sort of the biggest thing you could do. Otherwise, you're kind of just fiddling with numbers to a large degree. Star Wars Zero Company does XCOM style combat. Yeah, I mean that's similar to, in a way, to like what Expedition 33 is doing. It's not XCOM, but it's turn-based. It's going back to turn-based combat with an actual like you switch arenas and stuff. That is a way to dramatically control costs, like turn-based or combat mode or something where you switch into a different thing for combat is definitely a way to constrain your costs massively, for sure. What do I think about remakes that change a lot of the game and art direction of the OG games? I mean, I think that what Final Fantasy VII is doing is really interesting. I would be scared to try, but it's really interesting. I think that when you're doing a remake, so this is the, like, you've got the 4 levels. So you've got the four R's. You've got re-release. So literally, this game we just made it run on the PS5 and put it out. So that changes nothing. You've got remaster. So you're going to go in and you're going to update the art, and you are going to you're basically just turning the fidelity knobs up, and obviously these lines are fuzzy. You've got remake, where you're going in and you are rebuilding the thing. At that point, I think you have a certain degree of responsibility to do more than just shot for shot remake the original game. Otherwise, what are you doing? So at that point, you have to say, like, if I'm remastering a game, then I don't need to consider the fact that some of the things that were done are 20 years out of date, and maybe the story plot line is a little bit iffy now. I don't worry about it. At a remake, I need to start worrying about that. And then a reimagining, it's like all bets are off. It's like, yeah, we're going to do totally different things. I think games can be successful doing all of those things. If I was doing it with the Dragon Ages, I would be tempted to stick on the side of remaster, because Origins has stuff in it that if you were doing a remake, you'd have to think about, and I'm not sure you want to have that conversation, to be honest. I think you want to kind of steer away from it and just let it lie, let it be the way that it is. Yeah, RPGs never seem to spend any time advertising role playing, always trying to show off their big blockbuster moments. Even Veilguard did this. Yeah, it's true, because going back to the question, the Rory Sutherland question, way early. Part of the problem is that the industry has not done a very very good job of showing conversation and branching. We've tried a couple of times. We did it Inquisition, we did it, and there was a couple other games that did it. It's such an important part of the genre, and yet we haven't completely figured out how to do it to show it. So yeah, if someone can really figure out how to show that in a way that catches people's eyes, I think that would really help the genre do better. Um, um, uh, oh, what is the protagonist type? Do I think fits? Do you mean like a tabula rasa versus a fixed protagonist? I mean, we've done them all, right? We've done chosen ones. We've done. Have we done completely? Let me think. Have we done anything that there wasn't some degree of chosen oneness? Um, no, I guess we haven't done a pure, complete tabula rasa, because you either had some sort of you're a chosen one kind of thing, or you had an origin or something like that. Um, what style of RPGs have the promise of being reproduced on a smaller budget? So, turn-based combat or combat mode, separate combat mode, um, um, less cinematics. Those are the most expensive things that you can get rid of pretty easy. Uh, yeah, a Steam demo could show branching. That's true, but I feel like to do it properly, you have to almost custom build it just to show it off quickly, because sometimes those changes are uh, those take a while. What do I think about remakes that change a lot? Well, oh, I guess I doubled that one. How do you think things would have gone if EA didn't buy BioWare? I assume Dragon Age would have been PC only. Mass Effect would continue to be published by Microsoft. So, I mean, there are two buyouts in BioWare's history. So first is when it gets bundled up, like it gets bought by VG Partners and bundled up with Pandemic. And then the second one is when EA buys VG Partners and acquires Pandemic and BioWare. If BioWare doesn't get bought at all, my understanding, I wasn't in a senior enough position to be sure about this, is that BioWare probably it goes out of business, is bankrupt, doesn't have any money, and goes away. If the first thing happens and VG Partners buys BioWare, but then decides we're a video game studio now and just runs on its own for a while. Um, I don't know how that happens because they're a private equity firm and they want to get their money back, but let's say they do it. Um, so yeah, in that case, probably Dragon Age is PC only, comes out in early 2009 instead of late 2009. Mass Effect is only Microsoft platforms, and the problem with that is that both games make way less money, so it's hard to see like how the studio does okay in that world. The reality is that publisher economics are almost necessary. They were almost necessary in that time period to survive. These days, you could self-publish on Steam and on the digital platforms, and you could probably do okay. But then you really needed to get the extra money you were getting from being sort of part of a big publisher. If I could have done the last Dragon Age story, how would I ended the series? Would it have ended with Dragon Age? So I feel like we spent a lot of effort shifting Dragon Age into an evergreen franchise. So no, I wouldn't. If I knew like if you knew that this was going to be the last one, I feel like you would want to do something grander, like change ages, for example, like flip from the Dragon Age to the next one, the Steam Age, or something. Like if you knew it was going to be the last one, but if you don't know it's going to be the last one, all franchises are just going to eventually fade away. So, and I think the reality is that in most times that's going to be the reality, because you're not going to want to make if things are firing on all cylinders, you're not going to want to shut it down. And if they're not, it's probably just going to be the last one you're not going to realize. So I guess I don't have a great answer to that other than to say, if I knew it was going to be the last one for some reason, then I probably would switch ages. That would be the one thing I would do. I feel like many games, the mission segments that are shown in gameplay real trailers are more scripted, then it appears more open, and the pacing is only correct if you follow the script. Is this a marketing tactic? Do devs expect players to know the path from the trailers? So it is a marketing tactic because you're trying to show the thing in as clear and tight a way as possible. So often the mission that is shown isn't the best mission to play, it's just the best mission to show. So it is done on purpose. The expectation is not that you're going to play it that way, because the experience of watching something being played and playing something are totally different. So you can enjoy something played at a much slower pace than you would enjoy watching. So it is on purpose, but I don't think it's a problem. Just know that when you're seeing something being played, you're seeing it being played to be as a marketing thing. And it's going to be, so you are always going to get things through a marketing lens, and that's good because you would probably fall asleep if you just watched most people just play through a level. Okay, so let's see. If making an RPG Final Fantasy style, where each new game is set in a different world, with series cohesion is still there, can be used as selling point of games. Maybe. I wonder if you could do Final Fantasy. I think you could do it. But Final Fantasy has been around a long time, so it's hard to take lessons from things that are so established, because they've established themselves in a time when there were just a lot less stuff going around. Like, imagine pitching Super Mario Brothers today as a setting. It's like, meh, there's not a lot there, right? So I think that you could do it. You could do this is a game. This is a game series with a very fixed set of themes, but very different everything else. Like I think it could be done. Um, do devs build every game from scratch? I found info about code libraries, in-house wikis, can pull code snippets from. That's what I found online for primary sources when I can find them. I would say no, much less so now than they used to even. Most teams do use off-the-shelf video game engines like Unreal or Unity or Godot. Not everyone. Some people write them from scratch. But even then, you want to pull art assets and stuff from game to game if you can. I would actually argue that most teams reuse less than they should, but there has been some voices within the fan community that push back on reuse in very illogical ways, which makes teams shy about reusing things that are visible. But definitely don't rewrite the code every single time. That's probably a waste of your time. Um, yeah. Okay. So I guess sort of to go back to the question of how would I have ended Dragon Age if I knew it was the end. Yeah, if you were making Veilguard and you knew that Veilguard was the end, then there are a couple of things that you could do. Is let Solus pull the veil down, like basically end the world. Let like there's some things you could do that you could basically sell with end screens that if you knew, you could just diverge the game a little bit more. If you knew if you knew this was going to be the last one, and it isn't necessarily going to be the last one, but probably. With more game development happening in countries with cheaper wages and cost of living, what is needed for Western game studios? I guess like this question got asked a whole bunch of times in a whole bunch of different ways. Smaller teams, work from home, anywhere on the planet, multiple independent studios collaborating. I'm not convinced about work from home being actually a cost savings at the end of the day. We have to figure out some better leadership and vision things before that is going to fully work. But yeah, like smaller teams. But of course, if you do smaller teams with massive outsourcing, all you're really doing is leading from Western locations and developing in Eastern locations, which is arguably what Expedition 33 is kind of doing. Is like they have a core team, but then they have a massive outsourcing team. Pulling back like lower fidelity, smaller teams, smaller games. Codev, maybe. Like one of the ways to, if you can take a game, so often the thing that bloats up costs is this, is if you imagine that there are n squared communication channels. N squared over 2, but whatever. So if you double the size of the team, you actually quadruple the number of communication channels. So if you can break the team into a bunch of smaller parts that only talk to each other in very limited ways, then you can actually reduce those channels way down, and it can actually dramatically improve your efficiencies. That's one of the things that I think Expedition 33 gets from having turn-based combat. They're able to say, we kind of don't care about animation as long as it fits in this box. Whereas if you have integrated combat, you need to care about it. It needs to touch a lot more things. So if you can break things into a bunch of different bits, you definitely can potentially reduce your costs dramatically. Do I think there's a threshold of gamers being fed up with a certain visual style in games? Can it be predicted to launch a game in a certain style that would look contrast effectively to all the others? Maybe. You're definitely taking a risk. So the idea being, people are going to okay. So here's an example for real. Wind Waker. When it was coming out, there was a very vocal group of people Wait. I'm mixing my Zeldas up. Which is the cell shaded one? I have to look. Yeah, Wind Waker. So got all confused there. Yeah. So Wind Waker, when it came out, there was a very vocal group of people who hated that art style. Hated it. Now it is actually considered one of the best Zeldas. So you can try to steer against prevailing art direction. And there will be people that will be very interested in that. But there will be people that will be like, what the hell is this? So, yeah, it can work, for sure. Telltale tracks every dialogue choice to keep use for it. And that's not actually how it works. So I don't actually know for sure that that's how Telltale works either. But it's not how Dragon Age works. Dragon Age sets variables when it matters. So if it decides later that it cares, it has to go back and set a variable. It doesn't track every single choice. That would be dangerous. I question whether Telltale does that either, but maybe they do. I'd love to learn more about Edmonton Game Studios. So Beamdog is that's Trent Studio. They're the ones that make the Baldur's Gates. Casey Studio is here still, and Aaron Studio is here. I mean, there are a fair number. Check out Edmonton Screens. I think they have a list if you just are interested to look. One of my favorite video game soundtracks. I'm not a big music person, to be honest. The music was usually handled in the games by other people. It's not that I can't tell things about music, but it's not a big strong point for me. So I don't. My goal for music, for me, is that it slides into the background enough to have an emotional impact without me really being fully aware of it. So I don't really have a good answer for that, other than to say that for me, the soundtrack is amplifying the emotion but being virtually invisible. Well, so what are games that I like that have less than 80 Metacritic? I actually had to go into Metacritic and wander around for a bit to try to answer this question. So the ones that I came up with is, the last Airbender game, I think is like in the 60s. I actually liked it. The Dragon Ball Z Budokai game, the first one is, I think, in the 70s. Greedfall. There are others, but I was like trying to remember things and then find them. So, Mary's studio is in Edmonton as well. So there are games that I like. Like I said, I play a lot of games for only a couple of hours. So a game that has a good opening, but is actually kind of a flawed disaster, I can really enjoy and get a lot out of. While other people might despise the thing because it has a good opening. So, yeah. When I met Casey again, do I ask him what he was doing with Anthem? No, it was too late, to be honest. Like, you weren't going to figure, like, whatever he was imagining or not imagining in terms of the future of storytelling, it was too late. We were just landing this on-fire jetliner at that point. Would I ever join a new development studio full of former BioWare developers if they had the rights to Jade Empire, Dragon Age, and Mass Effect IPs? Maybe. I would never say never. Certainly not on my short list of to-dos at the moment. But maybe. Like, there's certainly, as I've contemplated what could happen with the IPs now that EA is private, I have wondered what that would look like. So I'm closer to a yes than I was 6 months ago. For sure. Was it ever a viable option for BioWare to simply build Dragon Age 4 off the resources and coding already exists for Inquisition with a new story and features, similar to how Awakening used Origins as a foundation? So, so that's kind of what Joplin was. Joplin was converging. The plan with Joplin was converge with Mass Effect Andromeda. Um, uh, but the short answer is no, because um, Joplin basically got canceled so we could pull everyone onto Anthem. And at that point, it got forced to be a multiplayer game. So it's like, could you have made a game? Yes. Could you have made a sequel to Dragon Age Inquisition using that tech base? Yes. Could that game have happened within the environment that was EA at that time? No. So, technically, yes. Practically, no. What do you see as a main challenges in game adaptation from book series? So the problem, this you see this with writers that move across as well. The primary difference between, well, I guess if you're making a linear interpretation of the book, then it's not so bad. But so you don't have, so books have something that basically no other medium has, which is internal monologue. You can't really do it. You could do an internal monologue, I guess, in a game, but it would be voiceover and bleh. If you are doing an RPG, what books don't have is branching, and they also have what can prove to be surprisingly coincidental stories. So, making the story make sense when I'm in control can actually be harder than you might expect. If I'm in a tube, then it's a lot easier. But if it's an RPG and I have some freedom, it's a lot harder. If new AA would sell out Dragon Age GP, how much would it even cost? How does one decide? Yeah, this is a very good question. It depends on what you were selling. If you're selling everything, back catalog, code, all of it, then part of the way you would figure it out is how much money does the thing still make? Because it still makes money. Like, you're still selling Dragon Age Origins copies. I don't know how much, but a couple $1 million a year probably of the Dragon Ages. So that's got to be part of it. It's basically valued on, it's kind of a combination of how much money is it making, what's the future value, what's the future value to me versus to you, and those things all kind of glue together into something. So it's hard to say how much it would be worth. It's hard to put a value on it, and it really depends on how much it would sell for. But yes, it is an interesting thought process. Okay, I'm going to be right back. Okay, back. Sorry. Oh, I just realized I don't actually need to wear this. Okay. Okay, where were we? Okay, so a DAI remaster with Veilguard graphics. Yeah, like I think that you could do a remaster of Inquisition. I don't know if you'd get to Veilguard super easy, but you could get quite a bit better for pretty cheap. because the PC Ultra version of Inquisition looks pretty good even now. So you could do a lot. Okay, so Jade Empire, if it was going to make it today, would the flying minigame survive? Probably the flying minigame would not survive. We had a belief at the time that console games... So this is basically early in BioWare's transition into consoles. And so we really had a belief that console RPGs had to have the minigames. So it kind of is there because we kind of thought it had to be there. I like it, but it probably shouldn't be there. I would like... If you're going to do it now, what I'd really want to do would be have a partnership with a Chinese team. So you could still have it led out of Edmonton, but have at least a significant percentage of the team be EA Shanghai or something like that. I think you would. I think that would just bring a little bit more to it. That would be interesting. The other thing that I thought about, because I remember when Kung Fu Panda first came out, is maybe it should be Kung Fu Panda. Maybe you should be talking animals. Like maybe you should go full on. It should basically be Kung Fu Panda because Jade Empire and Kung Fu Panda 1 look a lot the same. How much influence have executive publishers, corporate actually had on the writing of AAA games, like the actual written text dialogue? I've seen lead writers state that they don't have much power of the writing that people think, or bad writing they blame is due to so-called committees. So I think the question is being misasked. So there is a review process. So writing is done, and then it goes through a very elaborate review process where a lot of feedback is given. Executives and publishers is not where most of that feedback is coming from. It's coming from leadership within the teams. So depending on those leaders, they can provide anywhere from rubber stamping everything the writers do to changing individual words being used. So the writers, especially so at the line writing perspective, usually there's not a lot of feedback coming from outside the writing team as to the actual word choice. Usually it does happen, but at the plot level, yeah, there's a lot more stuff coming from the outside for sure. If I could, would you have tried to push Revolver into full development? I feel like we canceled Revolver on its very best day. So, yeah, I was trying to do that. Probably best for my career that I moved on to Dragon Age. But, yeah, at the time I was pushing for that. It's a Kenyan Black, if you're asking what tea I'm drinking. What did the chair do when I got out of the chair? Did it squeak like crazy? Okay. What is my take on Tim Kaine and Josh Sawyer? I find so Tim started doing this like YouTube after me and has been way more successful than me at it. Couple reasons. I think he's a better storyteller than me. Second reason is that I think I threw away all my notebooks. I regret throwing away all my notebooks. He kept them all. I think he just has better receipts for things. I find most of their insights worth listening to. Everything, everyone does this in a slightly different way, so I don't agree with everything that they say, but a lot of what they say makes a lot of sense. What are some of my favorite indie games? So I think it really is interesting to think about what you consider indie. I guess Factorio indie, because I certainly put in 1,000 hours of Factorio. I like seeing games and teams that are doing interesting things. I'm not looking for a smaller, less ambitious version of something a AAA studio would do. I'm looking for someone who's trying to do something weird and different, even if it's something like with an indie game, I can enjoy an experience that I would normally not enjoy because I know I'm only going to see it for a little bit. Um, do I think Veilguard's writing was influenced by it being a live service, and how much of that survived? Yes, absolutely, and basically all of it survived. A lot of it is so. A lot of the fact that things branch less than they probably should. That's coming from the live service. The fact that the character conflict is less than it could be. Some of that is influenced by it being a live service. Some of the plots being smoothed out, that's coming from live service. So there's a massive impact from it being live service, and because the shift from because when it shifted back from live service, it wasn't essentially restarted. It lived in this constant world of being less than 2 years from ship, from basically from 2021 until it actually shipped, and that prevented a lot of things that should have probably happened from happening in the shift back. So yeah, absolutely. Oh, whoops. Do studios have any procedure or guidelines for developers to follow during online harassment campaigns? They usually do, but I would say not as good as they should have. Again, my opinion is part of this is having senior people who have been trained to wear asbestos underpants being your primary source of contact with the community as a whole, and they should be serving as the primary bulwark against this kind of thing. I think, even though studios have been reluctant to do this, I think that general policy should be that most people on your dev team should not be publicly acknowledging the games that they are working on their social media, because the way that social media algorithms work now, they are going to get sucked into this. If they are being hit by this, I think the easiest and best thing for them to do is to largely not engage at all. Are there better policies than that? Probably, but that's basically where I'm at, is enable the positive parts of your community as much as you can. Encourage the other parts of your dev team to disengage as much as possible. I know no one wants to hear that. I know people want to be able to engage with all the members of their team, but they're not equipped to engage with the general public. They're not trained for that. Do publishers even have narrative consultants from their side at all? When they have opinionated executives, is what they have. Executives feel that they have the right to have their opinion listened to on any topic they choose to talk about. I get it. They're not right, but I get it. Do you think that franchises can carry over world states over a long period? I believe once you go beyond a trilogy format, most choices in quantum characters will become flavor text. Yeah, basically. I mean, and that's basically what Veilguard should have done, is that largely you reach a point where everything from the first three games has largely reconverged, and you recognize it, you acknowledge it, you talk about it, you mention who's king of Ferelden, but largely it doesn't matter. I think that's probably what you do is you go like branch and then you merge and then branch and then merge. You could do more. You could make a series that is just like, but eventually people are only seeing 10% of what's written. So that probably isn't worth doing. Oh, okay, we're actually almost done. Okay. What would be my ideal game to make today if I can make any kind? I think that in the same way I've talked about the Need for Speed team, or not the Need for Speed team, the Burnout team basically pitching game where you drive cars really fast when they didn't want to make burnouts anymore. I think that ultimately any game I was making would be an RPG. I just think that it's too... I do want to try different things from a narrative perspective. I do think it's interesting to imagine different gameplay and conversations. I don't know what any of that looks like, but that's a place where I'd love to experiment and just try some different things. Do I think current culture war might prevent Western publishers from investing into MENA and African projects? Probably. Unfortunately, I mean, it might open up doors that weren't open before, because there are maybe people with money that want to fight those fights. But I think the average publishers, yeah, they're feeling a little cowardly at the moment. Yeah, I mean, Tim is maybe a bit more well known than me. Tim Kaine is a bit more well known than me, possibly. Um, he has a broader experience, even though he doesn't completely acknowledge it. My experience was programmer, lead programmer, and then running projects within AAA. He's run his own studio. He's done a bunch of different things. And also, he is closer to dev still than me. I've been in leadership and high-level leadership for longer, so a lot of my content is much more focused on like production style stuff, like hitting your deadlines and stuff that the average viewer is like, who the fuck cares about that stuff? And Tim, to some degree, is kind of agrees with that. It's like, I want to make the best thing I can make. So I have thoughts about Gary McKay. I mean, I'm pretty sure that effectively So I'll be the political answer for the question about the studio leadership for BioWare. If you are only going to have one game at a time, and right now BioWare has one game, it doesn't make sense to have an EP of that game franchise and a GM. So if you're going to choose between EP of Mass Effect and BioWare GM, the obvious choice is to choose EP of Mass Effect if you're only going to be one studio. So that would be probably what happened. Yeah, I mean, to a large degree, talking about paying off choices again, the people complain about the ending of Mass Effect 3, but the reality is that Mass Effect 3 is the ending of Mass Effect, the Mass Effect trilogy. So it is a game that is just there to pay off all of these choices, and they're spending an immense amount of their budget paying off of all those choices. If you keep that going, if you imagine that there was 5 games, and then that last game would literally just be cameos and callbacks of the game. I think that Saudi Arabia is trying to get into game development directly, not just buying out EA. I think they actually are trying to open up studios there as well. I think that is correct. All right, I think we've actually hit the bottom. So that was 3 hours. Is pretty good. It didn't die. Any final questions? Yeah, I think with Mass Effect 3, if you approach Mass Effect 3 as the end of the trilogy, then the ending of Mass Effect 3 doesn't matter so much. If you approach it as a game on its own, then the ending is like, bleh. Any Jade Empire features that didn't make it. So we were supposed to do. I don't know if I was looking forward to this. We were supposed to do basically a Pokemon so versions of this game that Ray really wanted were cricket fighting, something where you basically fought the spirits of your ancestors against other spirits of ancestors. It was essentially a Pokemon game. Ray really wanted that game. Probably best that it didn't exist, because either you're fighting crickets, which, or you're having your grandparents fight, which also. Like I mentioned before, I don't know who, if unless EA sells BioWare or Dragon Age, I don't know how another Dragon Age happens within EA. I don't know what Josh actually said about. I don't think I saw about Josh saying that, so I guess I don't have an opinion on it. Um, yeah, I'd have to find that video and watch it. All right, thank you everybody, and I have a I guess we'll see you in probably about a year, given our existing track record.